Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Grace Millane. Grace Emmy Rose Millane was born on December 2, 1996, in Wickford, Essex, to Gillian and David Millane. She is the youngest of 3 siblings and is known as a loving, outgoing, fun-loving, family-oriented, creative, and artistic girl. The family is very close, so Grace keeps in touch with her siblings and parents every day, even while studying advertising and marketing at Lincoln University, where she is living away from home. In 2018, 21-year-old Grace Millane graduated with a BA in advertising and marketing. Like many young people her age, Grace decided to take a year off before settling down in her career to celebrate the completion of her university degree. She chose to take a year off to travel around South America before going to New Zealand to tour. In October 2018, Grace embarked on a 10-month solo adventure. First, she traveled to Peru. Then, on November 19th, Grace arrived in New Zealand and checked into the base backpackers hostel in Auckland, preparing for a 2-week stay on the North Island. During her time in New Zealand, Grace met a 28-year-old man named Jesse Kempson, whom she had matched with on Tinder. Jesse was born on December 28, 1991, in Lower Hutt, New Zealand. He grew up in Wellington. As a child, his parents divorced, and he was raised by his grandparents for a time. As a teenager, he moved to Australia with his mother. However, in 2016, he returned to New Zealand and lived in a hostel in Wellington. Little did Grace know that Jesse had a dark side. He was known to be very charismatic, using his charm to manipulate others. Jesse struggled to keep a job or a place to live for long due to his constant lying. On one occasion, he lied to his former landlord, claiming to be a newly signed professional baseball player with the New Zealand national baseball team, the Black Sox. He pretended that his contract money would soon be transferred to pay rent. This deception lasted for 2 months until the landlord confirmed with Black Sox management that they had no idea who he was. Unfortunately, the landlord also learned that Jesse had run away without warning, costing him over $1,700. On multiple occasions, Jesse claimed to have a bachelor's degree in international law, that he came from a millionaire family wanting to buy a top restaurant in Auckland, and that he had connections in the New Zealand Immigration Department, among other lies. However, the truth is that Jesse is simply a delusional person, only able to impress others with his wild fabrications. His former roommates at Green Lane found him creepy and untrustworthy before he moved into City Life apartments. A woman he lived with claimed that he stole money from her house and then ran away. This cost the landlord at City Life thousands of dollars after Jesse lied about receiving a monthly salary and not paying rent. Jesse is a mystery to many. He often lies and frequently gets away with it. Back in the hostel where Grace was staying, she was happily conversing with Jesse. She was charmed by Jesse, even sending a text to her close friend Anna back home, telling her that she clicked with this guy. As her 22nd birthday was the next day, she decided to meet Jesse, who lived nearby, to get to know him better. On the day they were supposed to meet, Grace was preparing for her big party, feeling excited and optimistic about the evening ahead. She left the base backpackers hostel in Auckland at 6 p.m. and walked into the city center in a black dress, holding a small handbag, unaware that she was about to encounter a tragic event. The evening went off without a hitch as they went to a local bar and left together around 9:30 p.m. The next day was Grace's 22nd birthday, and her family and friends tried to contact her to congratulate her, but Grace did not respond, causing concern and panic among her family members. Grace had kept her family updated about her trip, providing them with details and photos. However, her family contacted Auckland police and reported Grace missing. Initially, detectives did not suspect Grace of any wrongdoing. They knew that Grace had not returned to her hostel on the night of December 1st and thought she might be staying with some new friends. They quickly searched for Grace on the night of her disappearance, using CCTV cameras across the city, and identified the mystery man with whom Grace had been seen that night as Jesse. That evening, Jesse met Grace. Before the appointment, he had gone to a local bar called the Bluestone Room, which was next to the City Life Hotel where he was staying. About half an hour before meeting Grace, Jesse was seen drinking 4 beers there, a lone figure in a pub further down Mill Lane. Meanwhile, Grace was waiting at the foot of the Sky Tower, where they had agreed to meet. This shows her anticipation of possibly starting a romantic relationship during the holiday. The Sky Tower is one of the most recognizable icons of New Zealand's largest city, dominating the skyline and serving as the focal point for many events. Most importantly, it is a public place where Grace would feel safer meeting someone. When Jesse arrived, the two recognized each other immediately. He hugged her as she smiled and walked toward him. The first place they visited was a burger restaurant and bar located on the first floor of the Sky City complex. During their time in Sky City, their every move was recorded by cameras. They were recorded as they went up the escalator to Andy's Burger and Bar, where they ordered cocktails and then sat together at a table to chat. About an hour and a half later, they left the bar and went to a nearby restaurant called the Mexican Cafe. After drinking 2 margaritas and a pitcher of sangria, they left the restaurant and went to the Bluestone Room, where Jesse had been drinking alone earlier. At 8:40 p.m., Jesse pulled Grace close to him and kissed her for about a second. In the next scene, they continued to kiss. Jesse then left, and Grace checked her phone, sending a final text message to her friend Anna. Grace then also left. Jesse used Grace's phone to post a message on her Facebook profile, saying she was beautiful and radiant. After around 9:30 p.m., the footage shows them leaving from the other side and going to the Mill Lane lobby of the City Life Hotel, then entering the elevator. Jesse searched for his key card as they headed toward room 308. It is unclear exactly what happened in room 308 after they arrived. However, by around 1:30 a.m., Grace had died in her room. It was confirmed that Grace never left the building, and Jesse did not call emergency services or any other assistance when she died. After Grace died, Jesse conducted several internet searches that demonstrated he was not only unconcerned about her death but was actively planning to cover it up. The next morning, after Grace had died in room 308, the man messaged another woman he had met on Tinder, trying to arrange a date for later that day. He was then caught on CCTV moving from his room to an entertainment outlet to buy a suitcase, then to a supermarket to buy some toiletries. He subsequently rented a red Toyota, and while Grace was still lying dead in the hotel room, he went out in the afternoon to meet the woman he had messaged earlier that day at a bar called The Dry in the upscale Auckland suburb of Ponsonby. The woman, who was a former reporter, appeared calm when she met Jesse at The Dry. During their conversation, he mentioned that all his friends were police officers and that a close friend was about to move to New Zealand to become a prosecutor. As they discussed a murder case she had worked on, he commented that it was a shame men could make mistakes and face long sentences. He then went on to talk about a man who had asked his girlfriend to have sex in a rough manner, which resulted in her death, making the woman feel uncomfortable. Jesse continued to lie throughout the conversation, making her increasingly uneasy. When she left the bar, although she felt very nervous, Jesse later texted her asking for another date, but she declined. After he returned to his room at around 5:45 p.m. on December 2nd, he rented a carpet cleaning device called the Rug Doctor to clean the carpet, under the pretext of removing red wine stains. After parking his rental car outside the hotel, he took a cart from the front desk, went upstairs, and returned with a cart carrying 2 large suitcases, one of which was identical to the one he had purchased earlier. He loaded the suitcases onto the cart and drove to a nearby parking lot. The silver suitcase contained Grace's body, while the second suitcase served as a cover to avoid suspicion. Throughout the day, surveillance cameras recorded him changing his clothes several times. Early the next morning, around 6:15 a.m., Jesse left the hotel and drove away, stopping only to buy a shovel at a store in the suburb. BS. During this time, Grace's parents became concerned because she did not respond to their birthday greetings. 3 days later, Grace's parents reported her missing, and a massive search was launched. On December 7, 2018, Grace's father, David Millane, arrived in New Zealand and made an emotional appeal for any information regarding his daughter's disappearance. Jesse was questioned as a suspect individual after Grace's mother discovered a message he had left on her Facebook page at 9:29 p.m. on December 1, just 11 minutes before they left the Bluestone room and went to his room. Detective Diana Levinson first questioned Jesse. He claimed that he had met Grace and parted ways with her at 10 p.m. on Saturday, which he stated was the last time he had seen her. However, detectives obtained CCTV footage from the hotel, proving that he had lied. During his second interview, he had no choice but to admit to killing Grace. However, he claimed that she had died accidentally during sex after he asking him to strangle her in an attempt to enhance their experience. Following the questioning, he was arrested, and police took Grace's body to the hospital. Grace's body was found around 4 p.m. on December 9 and buried on Scenic Drive in Waitakere Ranges Regional Park. A post-mortem examination was conducted in relation to Grace's death. It found that Grace had been strangled and had bruises on her body, indicating that she had been restrained. The murder trial took place in Auckland on November 4, 2019. Jesse attempted to explain Grace's death as an accident following a fight that went wrong, but the jury rejected his claim and found him guilty. Jesse, aged 28, was convicted of murder on November 22, 2019. During his trial, he was described as a man whose behavior was so pathological that some of the women he met or communicated with on Tinder felt very uncomfortable. It was later discovered that, before meeting Grace, he had taken another British tourist on a Tinder date and brought her to his hotel room in Auckland 8 months earlier. At the age of 21, Jesse sexually assaulted a tourist. When she refused to have sex with him, she cried and froze in fear. She kept the attack a secret until she recognized Jesse from media reports on the day he was charged with Grace's murder. A woman who had been communicating with him online became cautious about meeting him. She shared a series of messages in which he detailed his sexual preferences and admitted why he enjoyed them. It is speculated that Jesse's desire to dominate contributed to Grace's death. In a separate trial, he was convicted of assaulting his former partner. For months, he used violence, threatened her with a knife, and forced her to perform humiliating acts after telling her he had been sent by the CIA to kill her. Jesse refused to admit guilt and showed no remorse. On February 21, 2020, Jesse was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 17 years. Grace's story has raised awareness about the importance of safety for travelers, especially young women, when exploring the world. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Rob Andrew. Brenda Evers was born on December 16, 1963, in Enid, Oklahoma. Her parents were Christians. The family often gathered around the dinner table, prayed together, and participated in church activities. Brenda grew up to be a quiet and calm girl. She did well in school and spent a lot of time at church helping others. While many of her friends were dating, Brenda patiently waited for her ideal partner. While in high school, She cheered for the school's soccer team. Brenda was a moral and humble young woman, just like her mother. She loved to dance but did not go to parties often. Brenda's goal was to be a devoted wife and mother, devoting herself to her family after marriage. At the age of 17, Brenda met Rob Andrew, her friend's older brother. Rob was older and in college. They quickly discovered that they had much in common. Although they were from different branches of Christianity, Brenda was Lutheran and Rob was Baptist. They both held conservative views, attended church regularly, and wanted to raise a large, happy family. Their friendship gradually blossomed into romance. Brenda then went to college in Winfield, Kansas. Despite being 125 miles apart, they tried to keep in touch regularly. To be closer to her lover, Brenda transferred to a college in Stillwater, Oklahoma, a year later. By the end of the summer of 1984, they married. Not long after, Rob received an attractive job offer in Houston, Texas. Although he was hesitant, Brenda convinced her husband to accept it. While Rob developed his career as an advertising executive, Brenda also completed her degree and found a job in the banking industry. Brenda loved the bustling life in the big city, with its tall buildings and vibrant nightclubs. Texas changed her a lot. She became more confident, started taking care of herself, dressed fashionably, wore makeup, and made many friends. However, Rob was not happy with these changes. He believed that a woman of faith should be more restrained. In addition, Rob began to feel homesick. So when he received an offer to return to the advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he happily agreed. Brenda did not support her husband's decision, leading to an argument between the two. In the end, they agreed that Rob would move to the new place first, and if everything went well, his wife would follow. After several months of living apart, the family reunited. In the early 1990s, Rob and his wife moved into a luxury home in Landsbrook. 9 months later, they had their first daughter, Tricity. Brenda quit her job to become a stay-at-home mom and raise the children. 4 years later, they had their son, Parker. Their family life seemed perfect, with love, children, home, and wealth. Rob and Brenda were married for approximately 17 years and had 2 children together. As a deeply religious couple, they raised their children with strong faith and moral values. They regularly attended church as a family and participated in charitable activities. From the outside, their marriage appeared happy and stable. However, in October 2001, their family life unexpectedly fell apart when Brenda left Rob and initiated divorce proceedings. After that, Rob stopped by their old home to pick up their children for the holidays as planned. That evening, Brenda met him at the door and asked him to fix a broken appliance in the garage. As Rob bent down to check, he heard footsteps behind him. As he turned around, he was shot and fell to the concrete floor. At around 6 p.m., emergency services received a call from Brenda. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance was dispatched immediately. When paramedics arrived, they found a horrific scene in the garage. A man was lying in a pool of blood, dead from a gunshot wound. His wife, Brenda, had a less serious wound to her arm. Brenda's clothes were covered in blood, and she appeared to be in shock. Paramedics confirmed that she was indeed in shock. Brenda said that she had tried to give Rob first aid, but she thought he was dead. They noticed that the victim's hand was bandaged. After the incident, Brenda was taken to the hospital for treatment. Police began investigating the scene as soon as the ambulance left. They found a .22 caliber bullet in the wall and a shotgun shell casing, indicating that multiple weapons were used. Police also found the victim's wallet intact, ruling out the possibility of a robbery. To clarify the incident, they needed to interview Rob's ex-wife. At the hospital, Brenda explained the reason for her encounter with Rob. She said that while they were together, two masked and armed men broke into the garage. The attackers shouted something that Brenda could not hear. One shot Rob twice, and the other shot and wounded Brenda as she tried to run away. Both attackers then fled. Brenda did not know the identity or motive of the attackers. She believed that Rob was unlikely to have enemies because he was kind and helpful. Brenda admitted that she was scared, especially since there were children in the house at the time of the attack. However, Brenda's story was inconsistent. The police suspected that she was not telling the truth, especially when they saw that the children had not packed for the trip. Interviewing neighbors also did not yield any useful information. No one noticed anything unusual that night. To learn more about Brenda and Rob's personal lives, detectives decided to interview people they knew. It turns out that after the birth of their second child, the relationship between Andrew and Brenda became strained. Andrew often complained to friends and pastors that Brenda mistreated him and hated their marriage. In addition, a close family friend commented that the couple's feelings seemed abnormal. Brenda often expressed her feelings openly, even in front of strangers. Rob seemed to love Brenda too much, as he had forgiven her inappropriate behavior for a long time. Family friends all noticed that Brenda had changed significantly. From a normal housewife, she had become a woman with a more liberal lifestyle. These accusations were well-founded and were backed by clear evidence. Brenda seemed to be going through a midlife crisis. Her style of dress changed significantly. From a refined woman, she changed to wearing revealing clothes and wearing too much makeup. Not only that, Brenda also became secretive with her husband. She did not share where she went, who she met, or what she did. Eventually, Rob discovered that his wife was having an affair. In October 1997, Brenda began an extramarital relationship with Rick Nunley, the husband of a friend and former co-worker at a bank in Oklahoma. They dated for a year, then only communicated by phone occasionally. Brenda then began a relationship with James Higgins, a local store owner. At first, James Higgins was attracted to Brenda's style of dress and flirtatiousness. They began seeing each other regularly once or twice a week after Brenda gave him a hotel room key. The relationship lasted about 5 years. During this time, Brenda's husband, Rob, was completely unaware of the affair. However, he realized that their marriage was in trouble. Brenda hardly spoke to or spent time with Rob anymore. Despite this, Rob remained hopeful that things would improve and tried his best to keep his family together. In 2001, Brenda ended her relationship with James Higgins. This decision had nothing to do with her husband or their marriage. Instead, Brenda had gradually fallen into a life of debauchery and vice. 2 years earlier, a Baptist church had been built in Oklahoma City, largely thanks to Rob's contributions. There, Rob became a deacon, and his wife took on the role of Sunday school teacher. Outwardly, their family appeared prosperous and adhered to traditional moral standards. At that time, Brenda still maintained the image of a model wife. She enthusiastically taught the children basic lessons about religion and friendship. At the church, Brenda met James Pavitt, a married part-time teacher and friend of Rob's. Although James was a devout Christian, he was attracted to Brenda's charm. They began seeing each other in the spring of 2001. At first, they kept their relationship secret, but it gradually became more public. Everyone in the church noticed their closeness. Rob suspected his wife of having an affair, and the two had a big argument. When James divorced his wife, Brenda and Rob also decided to divorce. Although Rob still wanted to save the marriage, Brenda was determined to file for divorce. Shortly after this event, a mysterious call was made to Rob's office, and then a serious car accident occurred, believed to be an assassination attempt on him. Rob became suspicious of Brenda and James, so he reported it to the police. Rob did not oppose the divorce and agreed to the custody arrangement for the children. He even supported Brenda financially. So, what was the motive for killing him? The motive was money. James Pavitt, who was also an insurance agent in addition to teaching, had sold Rob an $800,000 insurance policy that summer, with Brenda as the sole beneficiary. As police investigated the attack on Rob's family, they discovered two important things: the relationship between Brenda and James, as well as a problem with the family's car brakes. As the events connected, Brenda's role in her husband's murder became clearer. Finally, the police also found a new suspect. It was Brenda's new lover, James Pavitt. 2 weeks before the garage incident, Rob went to the insurance company to remove his wife, Brenda, from the policy because she was unfaithful. James, the insurance agent, refused, stating that only the beneficiary, Brenda, could make changes to the policy. Not trusting James, Rob checked with the management. The investigation revealed that Brenda and James had attempted to falsify the policy by transferring ownership to Brenda. They had forged Rob's signature and backdated the changes. James's supervisor confirmed to Rob that he was still the owner of the policy and that only the insured could make changes to it. When James learned of this discovery, he was furious, as it led to his dismissal. Investigators learned that Rob had a 16-gauge shotgun when he left the house. During the search of Brenda's house, Brenda did not turn the gun over, and it was not found, which was quite strange. However, when they searched neighbor's house, Judy Gigstad's house, they made an unexpected discovery. A shell casing from the sought-after handgun was found on the bedroom floor, along with several .22 caliber bullets in the Gigstad's attic. The Gigstads were not home at the time of the crime, and there were no signs of forced entry. Gigstad's family confirmed that Brenda had their spare key. In addition, a key piece of evidence came from Joanna Larson, James Pavitt's daughter. On the day of the crime, she lent her father her car with the promise that he would have it repaired. However, when Joanna retrieved the car, she discovered that it had not been repaired and found a .22 caliber bullet inside. When she informed her father, he told her to throw the bullet away. Investigators also discovered that James had purchased a handgun the week before the crime. Therefore, they planned to question James and Brenda. On November 23rd, Rob's funeral was held. The case was confusing to the victim's family and friends. What was suspicious was that Brenda, her children, and James Pavitt were all absent from the ceremony. This absence worried Rob's relatives and the police. Apparently, those who did not show up had fled, perhaps assuming that the police were searching for the perpetrators. By that time, the suspects had been identified. The autopsy results were released. Brenda's account of the attack differed significantly from the forensic report. As the police had suspected, 2 different weapons were used in the attack. Rob and Brenda's injuries did not match Brenda's description. The first shot at Rob was fired from a distance with a shotgun, while the second shot was fired at close range with a .22 caliber pistol. Brenda's arm was also shot at close range with the same .22. By analyzing the location and shape of the bloodstains on his clothes, it was concluded that Brenda was near Rob when he was shot. The angle of the bloodstains matched the shooter's position, indicating that Brenda herself fired the second shot at Rob. After receiving the autopsy results, Brenda and James were officially declared suspects and wanted. During their escape, James and Brenda eluded the police for many days. The authorities warned the border guards that they might have crossed into another country. However, no trace of them was found. After some time, it became clear that the two had left the country, with the police suspecting they were in Mexico. To catch them, the authorities decided to freeze their bank accounts. Without money, they would eventually be exposed. And sure enough, 3 months later, James contacted his daughter to ask for money. However, he did not expect that his daughter was cooperating with the investigation. Joanna had doubt that her father was involved in the case. It was clear he was hiding something. Thanks to James's call, the investigation discovered the perpetrator's hideout in the city of Cancun. In February 2002, James and Brenda were arrested at the border and turned over to U.S. authorities. They were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. The children were placed in the care of their grandparents. After their arrest, neither defendant cooperated with the investigation. They pleaded not guilty and spoke only when their attorneys were present. James was the first to appear in court. The prosecution built a thorough case. They presented information about James's past as an army sniper and his ability to use a gun. His illicit relationship and the plot to murder Rob were also mentioned. His daughter's testimony and physical evidence were presented. Ultimately, the jury found James guilty and sentenced him to death. Brenda's trial was different from James's. Instead of focusing on the details of the case, the prosecutors presented information about Brenda's character and personal life. They called her former lovers to testify, portraying her as unethical and untrustworthy. When questioned about her motive for killing her husband, Brenda claimed innocence and asked to be released if people truly believed her. However, the prosecutors countered by describing her as someone who did not love her husband and killed him for personal gain. To reinforce their argument, the prosecutors presented items from Brenda's suitcase when she fled to Mexico, including lingerie and sex manuals. They questioned whether a grieving widow would act like that. During the trial, the defense team tried to portray Brenda as a victim. They mentioned that she was injured in the attack, but forensic experts determined that she had inflicted the injuries on herself. The defense also produced a confession letter from James, but a handwriting expert confirmed that Brenda had forged the document. A shocking revelation from James's attorney was that Brenda would be the beneficiary of his insurance policy if he died. This suggested that Brenda may have plotted to kill James the same way she did Rob. Or perhaps she hoped to prove her innocence and frame James so that after he was executed, she would still receive the insurance money. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Brenda guilty and sentenced her to death. Both Brenda and James are currently on death row. Brenda has appealed repeatedly but has been unsuccessful. The crimes of Brenda and James were extremely serious. It is worth noting that they claimed to be religious and taught morality to children, which makes the case even more horrifying. Those who preach morality but do not follow it themselves are hypocrites and cruel. Such people cannot be trusted because they do not truly understand and live by moral principles. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Marta del Castillo. Marta del Castillo was born on June 19, 1991, in Seville, Spain, to parents Eva Casanova and Antonio del Castillo. At the age of 17, Marta was a normal high school student like everyone else, then her life changed completely. On January 24, 2009, Marta was in the middle of a conversation with her best friend, Sylvia Fernandez. She abruptly ended the conversation, explaining that she had to leave quickly because her boyfriend, Miguel Carcano, was waiting for her downstairs. Marta told Sylvia that she needed to talk to Miguel to clear up some issues in their relationship and promised to fill her in on everything when she returned. Marta ran into her father in the hallway and he advised her against getting on Miguel's motorcycle. In response, Marta just gave her father a light kiss on the cheek. She left her home at 5:30 p.m., and as the hours passed and she failed to return, her family started to worry. Marta's mother reached out to several people, and they all gave the same answer: Marta was probably with Miguel, who would likely know where she was. However, when they tried to contact Miguel, he didn't answer their calls. As a result, Marta's father decided to visit Miguel's house. Despite ringing the doorbell multiple times, no one answered the door. They eventually got in touch with Samuel Benitez, a close friend of Miguel's who claimed to have seen Marta that night. According to Samuel, Miguel dropped Marta off at his house at midnight, which was plausible considering it was only 11:45. Marta's family became more worried, and at 2 a.m. that morning, they reported her missing to the police. At that point, they had no idea that Marta's disappearance would become one of the most highly publicized cases in the country's history. 4 hours after Marta's disappearance was reported, the police identified Miguel Carcano, Marta's boyfriend, as a suspect. Despite this, a third report was filed at 1:30 p.m. But the authorities failed to take immediate action. The family grew increasingly frustrated with the delay. However, 17 hours after the initial request for help, the police initiated a search for Marta. As time went by, Marta's family took matters into their own hands and started collecting statements from Marta's relatives and friends. They also organized a press conference on January 27, 2009, and initiated a campaign to find her. A large protest took place in Seville the day after Marta's disappearance, with 2,000 people demanding her safe return under the slogan, "We are all Marta." A second demonstration on February 7 drew around 3,000 people, and the case received widespread media attention. After 21 days of searching, the police finally found Miguel Carcano on February 13. The 20-year-old confessed to Marta's murder and revealed that he had dumped her body into the Guave River near his apartment. However, he claimed he did not act alone and implicated Samuel Benitez as an accomplice in disposing of the body. Samuel accepted responsibility for his role in the crime. Further investigation led to the identification of additional accomplices, including Francisco Javier Garcia Marin, aka El Cuco, a troubled minor, Francisco Delgado, Carcano's brother, and Maria Garcia, Francisco Delgado's girlfriend. All 5 suspects were arrested and interrogated, but their statements were inconsistent. Meanwhile, a thorough search for Marta's body in the river began. On February 16, Miguel repeated his statement to a judge claiming he had only admitted to the crime due to police pressure and was not involved in Marta's murder. Miguel Carcano changed his testimony on March 18, claiming that he and El Cuco had violated Marta with a knife before strangling her. He then took Marta's body to Delgado's house and disposed of it in a garbage container. However, Marta's father accused Delgado's girlfriend, Maria Garcia, and theorized that Marta's body may have been destroyed, as Maria Garcia's father worked at a biological waste crematorium. Despite this theory gaining media attention, the police continued searching for Marta's body. On November 16, 2009, El Cuco was moved to a supervised apartment because he had exceeded the maximum time allowed for confinement. He was awaiting trial, which took place in February 2011. El Cuco was acquitted of abuse and murder charges due to insufficient evidence, but was sentenced to 2 years and 11 months in a juvenile detention center for covering up for Miguel. The trial for the 4 defendants Miguel, Samuel, Delgado, Maria Garcia involved in the case began on October 17, 2011. During the trial, Miguel Carcano admitted to hitting Marta with an ashtray during a heated argument, which led to her death. He also revealed that his previous statements about abusing Marta were false. The investigation revealed inconsistencies in the stories told by Delgado, Maria Garcia, and Samuel. They claimed to have no knowledge of Marta's whereabouts after her death. They alleged that Miguel fabricated the entire story to reduce his guilt. However, forensic analysis uncovered incriminating evidence. On November 22, 2011, the forensic police discovered traces of Marta's blood on Miguel's jacket. A mix of Miguel DNA and Maria Garcia's DNA was also found on a roll of fabric tape. Additionally, a DNA match from Delgado and Maria Garcia was detected on an extension cable, believed to have been used to strangle Marta. This was surprising, given the accused had consistently maintained they had only been at the crime scene early in the morning and had no knowledge of the incident. When confronted with the new evidence, Maria Garcia was accused of violating Marta's body in attempting to cover up the crime. A detailed analysis of the crime scene revealed up to 5 fingerprints on 3 alcohol bottles, with one belonging to El Cuco. As the investigation drew to a close, the 4 suspects were under intense scrutiny from the public. Their trials were heavily guarded by the police, and the prosecution presented a substantial case against Miguel, Samuel, Delgado, and Maria Garcia. The trial involved 90 witnesses, including national police officers and experts. The prosecution also presented 30,000 pH monitorings, crime scene photographs, DNA evidence, and other items found at the house on Leon 13. The trial sparked a massive public outcry, drawing large crowds that pushed against the police barrier. The public requested to view Marta's body and also wanted to catch a glimpse of Miguel, the accused. Despite Delgado and Maria Garcia attempting to conceal themselves with hats and sunglasses, however, they were still unable to escape the crowd's attention. A woman approached them, shouting insults, while others tried to remove their sunglasses and pushed them forward, forcing them to reveal their faces to the surrounding crowd. During the trial, El Cuco's mother gave an interview with her face covered, insisting on her son's innocence and stating that neither she nor El Cuco had any knowledge about Marta's body. Despite being labeled a liar by journalists, she received 10,000 euros for the interview. A key witness then came forward, a taxi driver who had given Delgado a ride on the night of the crime. The driver explained that he had been extra cautious with his passengers, as a colleague had been murdered recently. He recalled picking up a bald, bearded man matching Delgado's description, who had a plastic bag and stared at him intently. The driver stated that he dropped Delgado off on Leon's 13th Street, exactly where the crime took place, and charged him €8 for the ride. However, Delgado's defense lawyer questioned the driver's statement, pointing out that the fare for the 2-kilometer ride should have been €5, not €8, which cast doubt on the driver's testimony. Marta's parents took the stand and described the immense pain they were experiencing due to the situation. They had to quit their jobs, start taking psychiatric medication, and even develop depression. Their other 2 daughters, Marta's sisters, were also going through a terrible time. The jury's verdict in January 2012 did not bring the family the satisfaction they were hoping for. Miguel was the only person responsible for Marta's murder and was sentenced to 21 years and 3 months in prison. Additionally, he was banned from living in the city where Marta's family resides for the next 30 years. He to pay part of the trial costs and compensate Marta's parents with 280,000 euros for the moral damage caused by her murder and disappearance. Each of her sisters was also awarded 30,000 euros. In contrast, Delgado and Samuel were released due to lack of evidence placing them at the crime scene at the time of the murder. However, the following year, they demanded that Marta's family pay for the trial costs, adding to the family's distress. Marta's father expressed his intention to seek justice beyond Spain's borders, as he believed the country's system was outdated. He even considered taking Marta's case to Strasbourg, home to the European Parliament and the European Court of Human Rights. In December 2011, Marta's mother wrote a heartfelt letter to Miguel, who was in prison at the time. She asks him to return Marta's body so they can end the long suffering they have endured. She longed to give Marta a proper burial, where she could visit her, bring flowers, and talk to her. Unfortunately, the letter went unanswered. On January 24, 2012, 3 years after Marta's disappearance, demonstrations took place in various Spanish cities and towns, demanding justice for the young girl. As a result, Miguel faced threats from fellow inmates and attempted to take his own life. He was then transferred to a specialized therapy unit where he had limited contact with the outside world, including no visitors or phone calls. During his imprisonment, Miguel created multiple versions of the crime, with as many as 7 different accounts. This led to several lawyers withdrawing from his case due to inconsistencies. In his latest testimony, presented in 2013, he implicated someone close to him as the perpetrator of the crime. Miguel described an argument between him and his brother, Delgado, over the mortgage for their house at Leon 13. The dispute began when Miguel sent a letter to the family stating that he no longer wanted to cover for Delgado. Miguel stated that a disagreement over a fraudulent loan led to a physical confrontation. The situation became violent and Delgado allegedly threatened his younger brother with a weapon. When Marta intervened, she was fatally struck with the butt of Delgado's gun. After the incident, Delgado made a phone call, but the recipient and the content of the conversation are unknown. Delgado then left the house, leaving Marta's lifeless body behind. El Cuco arrived, and Delgado asked for his help in disposing of the body. They used a wheelchair to transport the body to the Mahala farm in Laneda, where they buried it. Marta. At first, Marta's parents believed Miguel's story and were grateful to him for telling the truth. They requested that the investigation be reopened, this time focusing on Delgado. However, the prosecution and the judge did not find Marta's statements credible. Marta's father visited Miguel in prison, asking for his cooperation in finding Marta's body. In exchange for Miguel's help, Marta's father offered him a deal. Upon his release from prison, he would give Miguel the house located at Lawn 13, which he had previously purchased. The search for Marta's body became one of the most expensive in the country's history, involving extensive land and sea searches. It seemed impossible for Miguel, Samuel, and another person to transport Marta's body on a motorcycle without incident. During the reenactment, the body fell off the moment the engine started. After Miguel claimed that the body was thrown into a trash bin, the search shifted to the local landfill, which receives all the area's waste. In order to find any relevant clues, the search team estimated that they would need to remove approximately 40,000 tons of waste from the landfill due to the large amount of time that had passed since Marta's disappearance and the massive amount of waste at the landfill. The search for Marta's body lasted 32 days but was unsuccessful. Miguel, the accused, gave investigators 4 different locations where evidence might be found, leading to multiple new searches. However, the searches were hindered by a lack of funds, and at one point, the then Interior Minister Alfredo Perez had to pause the search due to financial constraints. In April 2013, Miguel pointed to Delgado as the real murderer and provided another location where Marta's body could be found, this time near the city of Lake, Canada. Despite having lost credibility due to his previous false versions, a new search was conducted. Miguel went with the police to the area and gave them a general idea of where he claimed to have buried Marta's body in 2009, along with Delgado. The police excavated the soil of 6 farms, focusing on areas with recent earth movements. A total area of 10,000 square meters was scanned, but unfortunately, nothing was found. All the searches were unsuccessful, and at the request of Marta's parents. The search was halted until 2015. The public ministry requested that the defendants compensate the Ministry of the Interior for the costs incurred during the search, amounting to $66,329. In a new development, an individual named Oscar, who claimed to be a criminal, approached El Cuco's, Rosalia's mother, and pretended to seek a confession. However, his actual intention was to infiltrate and secretly gather information. Over time, Oscar and Rosalia developed a close relationship, meeting every 2 or 3 days and speaking daily on the phone. Rosalia trusted Oscar enough to give him the keys to her house, and they shared secrets and took long walks on the beach together. He gained her trust and affection. Oscar even convinced Rosalia that they would leave the country together once her son's, El Cuco situation was resolved. Meanwhile, Oscar secretly recorded 600 hours of conversations between Rosalia and those around her over a period of 2.5 years. In October 2011, El Cuco was granted temporary release from the juvenile center, where he was being held for covering up for Miguel. During one conversation, Oscar asked El Cuco if he thought the police were following him. El Cuco replied that were, and that the police were trying to find out where they had hidden Marta. This statement incriminated El Cuco and revealed his involvement in Marta's disappearance. Realizing his mistake, El Cuco quickly tried to retract his statement, claiming he had done nothing wrong. Oscar played along as if he hadn't noticed. However, in other recordings, El Cuco made fun of the police's efforts to find the body, and Rosalia criticized the investigators for not examining her phone records closely. Although Oscar worked diligently to record conversations, the 600 hours of recorded material was not presented as evidence in court. It wasn't until 13 years after Marta's disappearance, in 2022, that the recordings led to results. On May 26, 2022, a large crowd of mostly neighbors from Marta's family gathered outside the courthouse to demonstrate their support for a new trial. Rosalia and El Cuco arrived at the courthouse, protected by police. El Cuco was fully covered, wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, gloves, and a mask. Rosalia wore sunglasses, a mask, and a headscarf. In 2011, El Cuco claimed he wasn't at the scene of the crime on Lyon 13th Street. El Cuco said he had gone home around 11:30 p.m. with friends and met his mother's partner, Oscar, who was taking out the trash. Oscar then went upstairs to his apartment and stayed there for the rest of the night. Rosalia claimed she had gone out for drinks with Oscar around 11:30 p.m. and returned home around 1:30 a.m. on January 25th, finding her son asleep. El Cuco admitted that on January 24th, Miguel contacted him for assistance after killing Marta. Miguel requested his help in burying Marta's body, along with Samuel. They used Rosalia's vehicle to travel to Lyon 13, where Delgado is also there. During this time, Rosalia, El Cuco's mother, stayed at a bar until 4:30 in the morning. Upon returning home, she found her son missing. In the end, El Cuco and Rosalia were charged with perjury for hindering prosecution. As a result, El Cuco and Rosalia were sentenced to 2.5 years in prison on June 9, 2022. The judge also imposed a fine of €1,144 on each of them, as well as ordering them to pay €30,000 in civil liability to Marta's parents. Despite the sentencing and fines, Marta's parents were more concerned with finding their daughter's body than seeking monetary compensation. In the same year, the investigative judge allowed an expert to access the mobile phones of Miguel and Marta. Notably, Miguel gave his consent for his phone to be examined, believing it would reveal evidence pointing to Delgado as the actual perpetrator. The primary objective of the investigation was to locate Marta's body, which remained missing. 13 years after Marta's murder, the civil court decided to close the investigation into the search for her body in November 2022. The court declared the investigation period had expired because no new significant evidence had been found. Marta's parents eventually accepted that Miguel would never disclose the location of their daughter's body. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Soni Millbrook. Soni Millbrook was born on February 15, 1981, in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. She is the daughter of Christine Millbrook Bennett and grew up in a large family with many siblings, having 2 sisters and 3 brothers. This warm and close-knit environment helped her build a special relationship with her cousin Jenny during her teenage years. Soni became a popular student at her high school. In 1998, when she was 17 years old and in the 11th grade, she met a man named Lakeith Moody, who was older than her. She soon began a relationship with him. However, the relationship was not a happy one, as Lakeith was abusive and violent, leaving visible injuries on Sonia's body. Despite this, they had 4 children, 3 girls and a boy named after his father. In 1999, Sonia's mother discovered a bruise on Sonia's chest. When her mother asked her about it, Sonia cried and confessed that Lakeith had caused the injury. A friend of Sonia's also witnessed the injury, but Sonia refused to report Lakeith's behavior to the police. Lakeith often controlled Sonia and tried to isolate her from her friends and family. That same year, Sonia moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. One day, the management informed her of an incident at her apartment. When she arrived, she found a chaotic scene: damaged furniture, missing clothes, a destroyed television, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including under the stairs. Strangely, the mirror had the words, "Kiki loves you," with Kiki being Lakeith's nickname. Lakeith's behavior made Sonia's relatives even more concerned. On October 31, 2000, Sonia and her cousin, Pamela, went to a bar called The Mirage with Lakeith. While at the bar, Lakeith became aggressive towards Sonia by slapping her and throwing a drink in her face. After the incident, Sonia and Pamela left the bar and got into their car. According to Pamela, Sonia was shaken and frightened by Lakeith's actions. Sonia asked Pamela to take her home immediately because she was afraid that Lakeith would come after them. When Sonia got home, she locked the door securely. An hour later, Lakeith came to the house, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela had to threaten to call the police to make Lakeith leave. Once Sonia calmed down, her cousin decided to leave her alone. However, that evening, Pamela received a call informing her that Sonia had been hospitalized. Lakeith had forced his way into the house, and when Sonia tried to end the relationship, he attacked her. He tore off Sonia's clothes and hit her on the head, face, chest, arms, and between her thighs. She suffered bruises all over her body, loose teeth, and even lost consciousness because Lakeith choked her until she passed out. Lakeith later accidentally discovered that Sonia was on birth control pills, and he attacked her again. The next morning, Sonia called Pamela and asked her cousin to take her to the hospital because of serious health problems. In late 2008, Sonia, then 27, worked at a Christian institute. She was considered a reliable and punctual employee. Therefore, when she took time off or missed work, it was usually due to important reasons. Once, she called her supervisor to report that she could not come to work because her face was badly bruised, and she did not want the children to see it. After she asked for a day off, Director Leslie approved it. However, when Sonia returned a few days later, the bruises were so obvious that the director allowed her to wear sunglasses while working at the academy. Lakeith's violence not only affected Sonia and their children but also caused concern in the community. In April 2008, Lakeith was found sitting in an SUV with a gun in his hand, despite being previously prohibited from owning a gun due to a criminal record. Furthermore, he had previously served 2 years in prison for burglary and 3 years in prison for drug possession with intent to distribute. Sonia tried to avoid her boyfriend, but it was almost impossible. The situation came to a head on October 6, 2008. At that time, Sonia did not arrive at the academy by 5 p.m. Her sister received a text message from Sonia saying that Lakeith was holding her hostage in his home and had been beating her all day. Sonia also provided her home address. Sonia's sister called the police. 2 officers went to Sonia's house. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer since it was locked from the inside. They then called the security department to unlock the door. When the police entered the house, they saw Sonia's boyfriend jumping out of the back window of the apartment. Sonia stood in the hallway, crying and unable to speak because of her grief. Her 4 children were also present, making for a very heartbreaking scene. Sony's face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. When she calmed down, Sony explained what had happened. Sony and Lakeith began arguing, and he refused to let her leave the house. She told the police that Lakeith would not let her or the children near the window. She also said that Lakeith injured one of their children by grabbing the child and preventing her from taking the child to the hospital. Sony said that her boyfriend had been both physically and verbally abusive. During one altercation, he tied a baby blanket around her neck and choked her until she lost consciousness. When the police arrived, Lakeith threatened to choke her again and said he would kill her if the police did not let him go. The police searched the area but did not find Lakeith. Sony then left the house with the children in her car. 3 days later, she filed a restraining order against Lakeith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any contact with him. However, she missed the hearing, and the protective order was never granted. Nearly 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony was still in contact with Lakeith. That day, he was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead, he began arguing with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly turned violent as he slapped her and pulled her hair. She tried to break free and ran out of the apartment while Lakeith screamed and threatened to kill her. Lakeith did not catch Sony but instead kidnapped their youngest child, an infant, and drove away at high speed. A police patrol alerted to the domestic disturbance arrived as Lakeith was running away. The officers attempted to stop him, but he escaped. In early 2010, Sony, 28, was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. She had to stay home to care for her 5th child, who was 9 weeks old, because of poor health. In January, Sony and the children moved into the Budget Lodge in Memphis. However, on the first day Sony moved in, she and Lakeith's arguments became so loud that motel staff had to intervene because they were disturbing other guests. Sony and Lakeith could not maintain a peaceful relationship. They argued constantly, disturbing neighbors and management with the noise. On January 22, a hotel security guard witnessed Lakeith in a very agitated state. He arrived at a high rate of speed in Sony's car and then began yelling at her as she stood on the second-floor balcony with the children. In his anger, he threw a bag of groceries at her. The security guard arrived and told Lakeith not to make any noise or throw things in the hotel. Lakeith was instructed to settle the argument in his room. However, Lakeith told the security guard that he did not need to worry about it. Lakeith then locked his car and accompanied the security guard to an unoccupied room on the 3rd floor. The security guard asked Lakeith to hand over any hotel keys he had. Surprisingly, Lakeith had keys to 3 different rooms, even though he was not registered as a guest. The next day, Lakeith and Sony moved into room 222 with their children. However, the night manager asked Lakeith to leave that evening. Although Lakeith left as requested, he soon returned. The arguments between Sony and Lakeith continued for several more days until the guard asked Lakeith to leave the hotel for good. As Lakeith left, the front desk clerk tried to calm him down. The guard also warned Lakeith not to come back that night. Lakeith got into her car and drove away. Some time later, Sony spoke to Pamela and confided that she was having problems in her life. She was staying at the motel and wanted to talk to Pamela about something important. Sony said that she would call if she left the motel or if her boyfriend left first. The next day started normally. At 7 a.m., Sony took the younger children to daycare and the older children to school. Around 11 a.m., the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door and spoke to her through the window to inform her that they needed to pay the rent or they would have to leave. The manager returned several times that day. On a visit around 2:30 p.m., Lakeith answered the door. The room was dark. Lakeith told the manager that his mother was on her way to pick up the money. On January 27th, Sony did not pick up her older daughter on time. So the school secretary called the child's grandmother, Christine, to ask her to come pick up the girl. When Christine tried to contact Sony, she received no response. At around 6 p.m., she discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Concerned that she could not reach Sony, Christine asked her husband to pick up the younger children from daycare while she went to the school to find out what was wrong. They contacted the police and reported the incident at approximately 10:30 p.m. Later, on January 28, the housekeeping manager re-entered room 222 and began taking inventory of the items that Sony and Lakeith had left behind. The room was filled with clothing in a large trash bag, which was then taken to a storage area. After the room was cleaned, it was ready for new guests. On January 29, James and Rhonda Sargent moved into the room. They quickly noticed a foul odor and attempted to block it with incense, but were unable to eliminate it completely. They also discovered that previous tenants had attempted the same, as they found scented tissues in the tiles and ceiling vents. Because the smell was so strong that they reported it. On January 29, officers from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Sony's whereabouts, as that was where she was last seen. However, they did not enter room 222. Lakeith was arrested on February 2, around 7 p.m., while inside Sony's car at a shopping center. He was held for 48 hours on a charge of car theft. During questioning about Sony's disappearance, Lakeith said he last saw her on January 26. He explained they had met in the hotel parking lot that morning after Sony had dropped off her children at school. They went into the room, had sex, and then returned outside. Lakeith then took Sony's car keys and left the hotel. He claimed Sony planned to use her welfare and student loan money to buy a new car, so he wasn't worried about keeping her car. Lakeith also said he had been living in the car since January 26. However, investigators discovered that Lakeith had actually been staying at a different hotel. Additionally, given the snowy weather during that time, it was unlikely that he had spent the night in the car. On February 3, police found a debit card with Sony's name on it and several recent purchase receipts inside the car. That same day, police also searched the clothes stored at the hotel for DNA or other evidence, but found nothing. Due to the lack of evidence linking Lakeith to Sony's disappearance, he was released. Sony's cousin and her mother had to undertake the painful task of going to the hotel where Sony was staying to collect her belongings. At that time, Sony's cousin had a bad feeling but did not find any evidence. On February 4, the police went to Sony's cousin's house and found a DVD player in Sony's wallet. Sony's cousin said they had received the items from Moody. According to the cousin, Lakeith borrowed the DVD player on January 24 under the pretext of watching a movie and drove a red car that day. When he saw Lakeith again a few days later, the cousin asked why Lakeith did not pick up the children on January 27. But Lakeith evaded the question. When the cousin asked about Sony's whereabouts, Lakeith left the DVD player and wallet behind and left. Around that time, guests James and Rhonda Sargent requested to be moved out of room 222 because of the persistent odor. Since there were no other rooms available, they moved to another hotel. Later guests in room 222 also complained of a foul odor, despite the room being cleaned several times and the carpets being cleaned in early February. The odor persisted, only easing slightly over several days. On February 4, homicide detectives arrived at the hotel to investigate. By this time, room 222 had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. As a result, the detectives were unable to enter the room to collect evidence. Instead, they asked hotel staff if they had noticed anything unusual. All staff responded that nothing was unusual. Then, on February 7, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel and changed rooms 3 times. During one of the changes, they spent the night in room 222. While there, they informed management that the room still smelled unpleasant. To address this issue, in March, the hotel performed a more thorough cleaning of room 222. The staff cleaned the carpet, bedding, shower curtains, and window blinds. However, the results were shocking. The odor not only remained but became even more intense. The manager discussed the issue with the security guard. During the conversation, they recalled that the previous tenant, Sony, had disappeared at the end of January. The security guard recalled the events that occurred at that time and suggested that the manager check room 222 for traces of blood or cleaning agents. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to accompany him. What they found was horrifying. The two men entered the room where the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the bed frame. The bottom of the bed frame had a cover. When they lifted the box spring, they discovered a large gap where anything could be hidden from view. Looking through the sturdy edges of the bed frame, they saw the unthinkable, a decomposing body. They called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. The bed frame was found to have many marks on it, and there were 2 pieces of broken wood near the headboard. A towel and a cloth bag were found between the legs of the body. The victim was wearing a shirt but nothing below the waist. The forensic team's autopsy determined that the cause of death was strangulation with a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the neck, under one arm, around the chest, and ended behind the back. The medical examiner concluded that it would take at least 2 to 3 minutes of sustained pressure to cause death. In order to find the killer, the police collected items from between the victim's legs for analysis. The victim's shirt had an unidentified fingerprint. In addition, the scarf and the cloth bag did not belong to the victim. DNA samples that matched Sony's genetic profile, as well as that of a woman, were discovered. More remarkably, male DNA was also found on the cable, which led to the hypothesis that Sony had died at the time she was reported missing. The coaxial cable used in the case may have come from a DVD player that Lakeith borrowed from her cousin. Lakeith had been arrested by police for illegal possession of a weapon, and he was also the last person seen with Sony alive, making him a suspect in the case. He was in Sony's car when he was arrested and taken to the Mason detention facility. On March 18th, authorities launched an investigation into why the case unfolded in such a strange way. The chief of police said the victim's family deserved an explanation and acknowledged that the circumstances of the case were unprecedented, making it a shocking case of domestic violence. He also regretted that the room where Sony died had been cleaned and rented out multiple times, making it difficult for police to collect evidence. However, this explanation was met with skepticism. One of the first tenants, Rhonda, said the police should have been allowed into the room when James and Rhonda visited in January and would have found Sony sooner if they had noticed the smell of a decomposing body. Rhonda believes the police were slow in finding Sony. Following the loss, Sony's family held a funeral for her on March 24th. Sony's children were placed in the care of her sister on April 1st. They are currently trying to gain legal custody of the children. Sony's sister said that although the children were the primary victims, everyone in the family's lives was turned upside down by the loss. She pledged to take care of Sony's children, making sure they had enough food, clothes, and toys, and to keep them together as a family. She also said Sony had benefited from a social program, and she would continue to care for the children as her sister had. The card had been loaded with money before Sony went missing because she received an income tax refund. Police tracked the card's activity and found that it was in Lakeith's possession. During the surveillance, they noticed that the card was used on February 1st at a convenience store Sony usually visited to withdraw cash using her electronic welfare transfer card. Notably, this occurred 4 days after Sony went missing. Officers went to the store and requested the owner to show them the footage from their 16 security cameras. Through the footage, they observed that on the morning of February 1st, at 11:38 a.m., a man dressed in yellow conducted a transaction at the store. He used a Sony card to buy a bottle of orange juice, withdrew cash, and purchased a cigar. After making these purchases, he returned to a car driven by someone else. With all the evidence against him, Lakeith's trial began in the first week of February 2014, more than 4 years after the crime. By then, the Budget Lodge Hotel involved in the crime had closed. Lakeith did not admit his guilt. During the trial, the prosecutor portrayed the case as the tragic end of a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, Lakeith's defense attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to establish his client's guilt. He pointed out that there were no witnesses or physical evidence to prove Lakeith's crime. The attorney also noted that the police found fingerprints on the victim's bed frame, but those fingerprints did not match Lakeith's. This suggests that someone else may have been involved in the crime. Additionally, the attorney argued that there was reason to suspect that the victim had had relationships with several other men over the years. He also emphasized that his client had never been convicted of domestic violence against the victim. Furthermore, he revealed something that the public did not know. Sony moved in with Lakeith again because she had to leave a relative's home due to a rat infestation. On February 6th, video footage showing Lakeith using a Sony prepaid card 4 days after her death was presented to the court. The defense claimed his calm demeanor throughout the transaction demonstrated his innocence, while the prosecution saw it as evidence of a cold and ruthless man with no regard for the crimes he was accused of committing. On February 7, 2014, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. On February 10th, he appealed the conviction, arguing that the court had erred in considering his past acts of domestic violence and that the evidence was insufficient. On July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the convictions, affirming the decision. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Maria Luisa Cedeno. On July 18, 2020, Maria Luisa Cedeno checked into the Lamb Mission Inn Hotel in Manuel Antonio, located in the Punta Arenas province of Costa Rica. She was accompanied by her pet dog, Mofelda, a small dog that she treated like her daughter. On her first day, everything seemed normal. Maria Luisa spent time at the beach, enjoyed lunch at a restaurant, and had some drinks. At 4:30 p.m., Maria Luisa requested a bottle of wine, a bottle of mineral water, and 2 glasses to be brought to her room. Throughout the afternoon and evening, there was no activity from her room. On July 20th, hotel staff attempted to contact Maria Luisa but received no response. A staff member had spoken to Maria Luisa, and Maria Luisa mentioned that she was living alone after ending her relationship with her boyfriend. She expressed that she was not feeling well and was traveling with only her small dog, Mofelda. She also shared that the ongoing pandemic, which had begun several months earlier, was taking a toll on her mental health. Given the difficulties she had faced in her life, she felt she needed a vacation. The hotel staff decided to conduct a routine room check. They found the front door locked from the inside, so they opted to check the patio door instead. This door was an emergency exit for guests with pets, allowing dogs to go outside. As they approached this exit, they found it was only partially open. When they entered, they smelled a terrible smell and saw blood stains scattered all over the room. In one corner, they found a dog alive but shaking with fear. On the bed, they discovered Maria Luisa's body wrapped in a sheet. Maria Luisa is a respected anesthesiologist. At the age of 43, she is the head of the Department of Anesthesiology and Rehabilitation at Cima Hospital in Escazú. Maria Luisa is highly respected by her colleagues, and she is always ready to assist whenever someone needs help. Maria Luisa's parents lived in the town of San Carlos. Friends described her as a strong, intelligent, and likable woman who loved to travel. Upon receiving the news of Maria Luisa's death, her family was deeply saddened. The mystery surrounding this case began the moment the staff discovered Maria Luisa's body. The crime scene was gruesome and brutal. After discovering the body, the hotel staff contacted the police. Upon arriving and examining the scene, the police quickly determined that Maria Luisa had been murdered. Maria Luisa's body was severely damaged and tortured. Forensic experts then arrived to collect evidence, determine the cause of death, and analyze every detail to identify the perpetrator. A subsequent autopsy discovered multiple bite marks on the body and 2 broken fingernails, indicating that Maria Luisa had fought back. The autopsy also revealed that the killer had washed the body, suggesting that he had taken Maria Luisa to the bathroom after the murder. Police determined that Maria Luisa had been murdered in the bedroom, as evidenced by the large amount of blood found there. The perpetrator then took the body into the bathroom, washed it, dried it, wrapped it in a sheet, and placed it on the bed. The killer had washed the body, possibly to eliminate evidence and hide signs of the crime. However, this effort was largely ineffective because blood was found everywhere, on the floor, walls, curtains, and bed. This brutality suggested that the attack was exceptionally violent. Experts took photographs and gathered as much physical evidence as they could. The body was sent for an autopsy, and the police started questioning hotel staff and guests who might have witnessed or heard anything. At the scene, it appeared that Maria Luisa was screaming loudly and her dog was barking. However, no one reported hearing any screams throughout the night, despite the hotel being mostly empty due to the pandemic. Only a few staff were present, and the hotel owner, Harry Bowden, lived there with his husband. Harry Bowden also let some friends live in the hotel because they were having financial problems, as the hotel was never fully booked during the pandemic. In Maria Luisa's room, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses ordered through room service were discovered. An inspection of her cell phone later revealed that she had sent a picture of the 2 glasses to a friend, but she did not mention being with anyone or waiting for someone in her room. When police interviewed Maria Luisa's friends and family to check for any enemies, they discovered that Maria Luisa always ordered 2 glasses, even when she was alone. She would pour alcohol into one glass and water into the other, indicating that she was by herself and not waiting for anyone. Police believe the attacker may have been someone who saw Maria Luisa at the hotel, noticed the back door open and took the opportunity to attack. However, the brutality of the case suggests that the killer must have had a deep hatred for Maria Luisa to have attacked her like that. This has left the police baffled. In this case, it appears that this was a murder committed by someone who knew Maria Luisa and intended to kill her. However, there is no evidence that Maria Luisa was with anyone or that she was seeing anyone. The autopsy results further revealed that Maria Luisa had been abused. She had signs of strangulation and marks on her cheeks, lips, arms, and chest. Since Maria Luisa did not scream, the police suspect that there were several people attacking her, rather than one person. Police believe that 2 people held Maria Luisa down while a 3rd person raped her. An analysis of Maria Luisa's body found no evidence of rope or restraints. Police also speculated that the attackers may have gagged Maria Luisa by stuffing something into her mouth, allowing them to carry out the attack undetected. It didn't take long for police to find their first suspect, a man who was staying at the hotel with several fresh injuries that looked like scrapes and bruises. The man was Herrera, who worked at a nightclub in the city and was staying at the hotel at the time of the murder. Herrera was arrested. His footprints were compared to those found at the murder scene, and 2 of them matched Herrera's footprints, which were found on the porcelain floor in front of the bed in the bedroom. A second suspect, Luis Carlos Miranda, was arrested after a hotel security guard reported seeing him walking the hallways at night with suspect Herrera. After Herrera was taken into custody, Luis Carlos Miranda was questioned to determine if he was connected to the case. Dental tests were conducted, which revealed his dental records matched the bite marks found on Maria Luisa's body. Hotel staff reported that they saw Maria Luisa meet with Luis Carlos Miranda and Herrera on a few occasions, but these encounters were casual, with no indication that they knew each other well. They simply greeted each other and exchanged pleasantries. This casual interaction may have been due to the small number of guests in the hotel at the time. Two friends, Luis Carlos Miranda and Herrera, were staying at the hotel due to financial difficulties during the pandemic. The hotel owner, Harry Bowden, had allowed them to live on his property. When the police discovered matching footprints and bite marks that implicated Luis Carlos Miranda and Herrera, they brought Harry Bowden in for questioning. During questioning, Harry Bowden shared that he and his husband had dinner with Luis Carlos Miranda and Herrera on the night of July 19, 2020. After dinner, the four men went to a private pool area. Harry Bowden explained that in exchange for their stay at the hotel, Luis Carlos Miranda worked on the hotel's marketing website, while Herrera worked as a chef and bartender. Harry Bowden and the suspects Herrera and Miranda were acquaintances and became friends over time. About a year before the murder, they began living in the hotel and began spending more time together, eating out and socializing. Meeting up led to a friendship between the four men. However, during the investigation, in August 2020, Harry Bowden cooperated with the police and gave an interview, but he was later arrested. Because his dental records matched two bite marks on Maria Luisa's body, police continued to seize the phones of all the arrested suspects and found compromising text messages between Luis Carlos Miranda and Harry Bowden. These messages, sent a few days before the incident, had Miranda inviting hotel owner Harry Bowden to have an intimate relationship with a woman while Miranda was watching the woman. Textual evidence combined with physical evidence led police to arrest 3 suspects to build a case. Harry Bowden's husband was the only suspect not arrested due to lack of evidence, including no matching fingerprints, text messages, or bite marks on Maria Luisa's body. The prosecution charged Harry Bowden, Teodoro Herrera, and Luis Carlos Miranda with the murder of Maria Luisa Cedeno. The defense team for the suspects argued that the bite mark evidence was inconclusive, suggesting none of them were involved. Before the trial, Harry Bowden's lawyer asked for house arrest, citing 2 reasons. First, the country's pandemic posed a danger to Harry Bowden, who is 69 years old. Second, he had just undergone knee surgery and had difficulty walking, often relying on a cane. As a result, the court approved the house arrest order, allowing Harry Bowden to return to the hotel. Although confined to the hotel grounds, he still enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, complete with servants, restaurants, and swimming pools. On September 13, 2022, the public trial of Harry Bowden, Teodoro Herrera, and Luis Carlos Miranda began, where text message evidence and dental records were presented. At that time, the prosecution had difficulty proving the involvement of Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda. Although text messages were found and bite marks were allegedly found on Maria Luisa's body, the bite marks could not prove who committed the murder. On the contrary, there was a large amount of evidence against Teodoro Herrera. A bloodstain was found, and he had superficial injuries. Furthermore, his blood was found under Maria Luisa's fingernails and on several personal items, such as a watch and a cell phone, which were in Teodoro Herrera's room at the time of the search. As a result of the trial, Teodoro Herrera was sentenced to 50 years in prison for murder and rape. In contrast, Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda were declared innocent due to insufficient physical evidence linking them to the crimes. Although the case was resolved, Maria Luisa Cedeno's family, satisfied with Teodoro Herrera's verdict, was not satisfied with the acquittal of Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Diogo Goncalves. Diogo Goncalves, born in 1999 in the city of Albura, Portugal, is an only child in a poor but hardworking family. His family made a living mainly from the unstable tourism industry. His parents always considered Diogo a good son. Those who knew him described Diogo as kind, responsible, hardworking, reliable, and very friendly. He enjoyed making friends and was close to his family. Diogo attended high school in his hometown. After graduating, he began studying computer science. To pay for his studies and living expenses, Diogo applied for a job at McDonald's in 2015, at the age of 16. When he was 17, his life suddenly took a major turn when his father suffered a stroke and fell into a vegetative state. That same year, while Diogo and his mother were trying to cope with his father's difficult situation, another tragedy occurred. Diogo's mother, who had always supported him in his studies and upbringing, was involved in a traffic accident. While she was on her way to work at the shopping mall where she worked as a cleaner, a car hit her, dragging her for several meters and causing her to die from her injuries. Although the driver fled, the police identified him and brought him to court. While Diogo awaited the verdict on the perpetrator of his mother's death, he had to move to a medical facility to receive the necessary care. His aunt, concerned about Diogo's situation, invited him to live with her, but the two had a serious disagreement. After a few weeks, they could no longer live together. Diogo told a friend about his situation, and the friend's parents offered him a room in their house in the Albufeira neighborhood. Here, Diogo was close to friends and people who helped him feel at home. Despite his young age, Diogo has shown an excellent ability to handle and overcome difficulties with patience and optimism. In 2017, at the age of 18, Diogo graduated with a degree in computer technology and completed a 6-month internship at Villa Vita Park, a top 5-star hotel. Diogo's abilities impressed the directors, and they offered him a job at the hotel as a technician. In 2018, Diogo decided to accept the offer and left the fast food chain where he had worked for almost a year as a shift manager. He entered a new phase of his life, envisioning a future filled with opportunities that would help him rise above the hardships he had experienced. After working at the company for a while and contemplating brighter days, he decided to buy a car. Diogo got along well with his colleagues, especially a girl he had a crush on, Maria Malvero, a 19-year-old hotel security guard. Maria Malvero was born into a normal family and, like Diogo, has gone through many hardships. Her mother suffered from mental illness, and her father left when she was very young, leaving her never to see him again. Maria, who works in security, became interested in martial arts and started practicing karate. She dreamed of becoming a police officer but was rejected by the academy because of her tattoos. This frustrated her, and she decided to join the SEER Info training course, which specializes in training security guards for the private security sector. Diogo has feelings for Maria and has expressed them openly to her from the beginning, but she does not reciprocate and maintains a cold attitude. Diogo is very fond of Maria, so much so that he turns down an attractive job at the Sheraton hotel chain in Lisbon just because he does not want to be away from her. He often brings her meals while she is on duty. Over time, Diogo and Maria became close, and people around them saw them as a couple, although there was no romantic relationship between them. Maria told Diogo that she did not want a relationship with him because she had just gotten out of a toxic relationship with a naval officer. However, she kept in touch with Diogo, causing him to harbor hopes of a future with her. Diogo did not give up hope and always tried to be close to her and please her. One day, Diogo was devastated when he accidentally saw a video on social media of Maria kissing another girl. Diogo was upset because he thought she should have told him that she didn't like boys, which was why they would never be together. Diogo's best friend, Fabio, tried to reassure him by saying that girls sometimes do that, but Diogo didn't believe him and insisted that Maria had lied to him, which was why she refused to be with him. Despite his disappointment, Diogo and Maria remained friends, and Maria continued to accept his gifts and invitations to dates. Diogo tried to take her home several times, but she always told him that her roommate had a jealous boyfriend and she didn't want to let another man into her apartment. Time passed, and in December 2019, Diogo was informed that he would finally receive compensation for his mother's death, which had occurred 3 years earlier. After receiving the sum of €70,000, the young man decided it was time to buy a house so that he would no longer have to pay rent. Diogo shared the news of his mother's insurance money with Maria. A few weeks later, Maria decided to quit her job at the hotel. She said that she could no longer bear the comments of her colleagues about her alleged relationship with Diogo. Maria also justified it by saying that she wanted to spend more time with her mother, who needed more attention because of her mental illness. At that time, Diogo had no reason to doubt Maria's words. However, later events showed that her decision to quit her job at the hotel was for darker reasons, and that is when the third character in the story, Mariana, 20, appears. She works as a nurse at the hospital and has a stable relationship with Maria. Maria and Mariana live together at Mariana's parents' house, as they are not yet financially stable enough to have their own house where they can enjoy their relationship. This is exactly Maria's plan when she learns about the large amount of money that Diogo will receive. From that moment on, Maria begins to get closer to Diogo. It turns out that Maria has shared information with Mariana, and together they decide to trick Diogo into gaining access to his bank account data and steal the money he received. The problem arises when one day, after being rejected by Maria several times, Maria suddenly tells Diogo that she wants to spend a romantic evening with him. This was truly a gift for Diogo. He couldn't believe his ears. After waiting so long, the thought of being with the girl he loved made him extremely happy. The meeting was set for Friday evening, March 20th, 2020. Diogo was delighted and had no idea why the girl suddenly changed her mind. As soon as Diogo entered, Mariana gave him the orange juice she had brought herself, but the drink contained an unexpected ingredient: 3 ampoules of diazepam, a central nervous system drug with anti-anxiety and sedative effects. Mariana was the one who suggested using this substance, having stolen the drug from the hospital where she worked. Mariana's plan was to anesthetize Diogo, access his bank information, and possibly manipulate his fingers to bypass the phone lock. Mariana is said to have waited in a car outside the house while her friend carried out the plan. She even texted Maria several times to see if the drug was working, as it took longer than she had anticipated. The situation inside the house became increasingly tense. Diogo did not understand what was happening and began to get anxious. Maria then tried to calm him down by promising to dance erotically, but first, she had to tie him to a table. After being in that position for a few minutes, Diogo panicked and asked Maria to let him go, but she became aggressive and began to beat Diogo. Using her martial arts skills, Maria overpowered Diogo, knocked him to the floor, and wrapped her arms around his neck, preventing him from breathing. According to Mariana, Maria then told her to go inside the apartment, and when she entered, she found Diogo lying on the floor. Mariana asked Maria what happened and criticized her for going off plan. The original plan was just to steal the key and take his money. When Diogo was unresponsive, Mariana performed CPR. However, when he regained consciousness, he became very agitated and tried to attack Mariana. In response to Diogo's reaction, Maria overpowered him by grabbing him from behind, throwing him to the floor, and strangling him again. Diogo lost his life at the hands of the girl he loved. His body was found in Maria and Mariana's living room, and soon after, they began their evil plan. They cut off his thumb and index finger to unlock his phone, log into the mobile payment app, and transfer money. This process lasted for several days due to the daily transaction limit at that time. Since Diogo was scheduled to go to work the next day, Maria and Mariana devised a plan to prevent Diogo's coworkers from discovering his absence. Maria and Mariana impersonated Diogo to text one of his coworkers. The colleague received a message from Diogo's number, saying that he would not be able to come to work and needed a replacement. However, this message seemed like an unannounced absence, which was unlike Diogo, who did not like to change shifts, so the message felt strange to the colleague. The colleague then asked Diogo if there was a problem and was told that everything was fine. The conversation with the hotel staff and people close to Diogo continued throughout Friday and part of Saturday, but these messages were increasingly uncharacteristic of him. On Saturday morning, Diogo's boss received a text message saying that he would not be returning to work because he had met a French woman and was moving in with her. This story seemed very strange to the boss because Diogo was a responsible person and would never quit his job so suddenly. In search of answers, the boss started calling Diogo, but he did not answer. He then received another message saying that he was not well enough to talk on the phone. Diogo's boss replied that he could only calm down if they could talk. He wanted to hear his voice and his explanation for what was happening. The reactions of Diogo's relatives to the messages Maria and Mariana sent convinced the girls to change their plans to explain their boyfriend's sudden disappearance. They decided to make it seem as if Diogo had decided to end his life and planned to dismember his body to get rid of the evidence. Maria later claimed that they were inspired by the TV show Dexter, about a forensic scientist who kills criminals and evades justice by removing traces of his crimes by dismembering his victims. After carrying out their evil plot, they stuffed Diogo's body into a trash bag and put it in the trunk of their car. They went to an ATM and shopped at a mall, where their hugs and laughter were captured on security cameras. They then went to a resident's house to begin dismembering the victim. Finally, Maria and Mariana placed Diogo's body in a black bag and put the rest of the body in a container. Meanwhile, at Mariana's parents' house, Diogo's friends launched a campaign to report him missing and contacted the authorities. They had to wait the required 48 hours to officially declare him missing. Maria and Mariana then left the house. Maria drove Diogo's car to the cliffs near the San Vicente Lighthouse in Cabo. Mariana followed Maria in her car. At around 2 p.m. that same day, Mariana threw Diogo's body off the cliff. She then left Diogo's car nearby. They thought that this way they could make it look like Diogo had committed suicide. Maria had no idea that instead of falling into the sea, the body would get stuck on a rock. They then left together in Mariana's car. They drove about 7 kilometers in 12 minutes to the Inferno Dago waterfall in the town of Tavira, where they threw Diogo's remains into the water. Shortly thereafter, Diogo's car was discovered in a parking lot near the Cabo de São Vicente lighthouse. According to multiple sources, 2 laptops were found in the car. Police were called to the scene and conducted a search on both land and sea. As a result, the body of a young man was discovered, partially covered by a black trash bag. At the same time, at another location on the coast, a French couple was stunned to discover Diogo's head. Diogo's hands and feet were also found after a thorough police search. Investigators said the circumstances of Diogo's death were strange. He was brutally murdered despite being a quiet person who did not associate with people of questionable reputation. Investigators could not find any hostile forces against Diogo. The police continued to investigate and soon discovered that Diogo had received a large inheritance after the death of his mother. Through the wire transfer investigation, they discovered that a large sum of money had been transferred from Diogo's account to Maria. Detectives tracked down Maria to find out why Diogo's money had ended up in her hands. Maria tried to convince the police that she had killed Diogo because he had abused her. Maria claimed that was the reason she had left the hotel before the incident. However, when police examined text messages between the victim and Maria, they found this was not true. Maria said that she and Diogo had become close after she left her job. During her first meeting with the police, Maria claimed that she was the only person responsible for planning and carrying out the shooting. Maria insisted that Mariana had nothing to do with the crime. However, Mariana's testimony contradicted Maria's. Mariana explained that Maria said she wanted to rob Diogo of his money and intended to kill him. Mariana said Maria wanted to make him suffer so that he would give her his bank account password. The evidence gathered by investigators was enough to convict Maria and Mariana. Detectives had Diogo's phone records, cell phone records, and ATM surveillance video. Maria and Mariana were arrested on April 1, 2020, and appeared in court in June of that year. The judge followed Maria's account of the events, and Maria pleaded guilty while repeatedly denying Mariana's involvement in the case. She said Diogo's body had been in a suitcase in a car parked in the garage for 2 days, and that's where the remains were dismembered. The judge then asked Mariana where she was when Diogo's body was dismembered. It was notable that the joints of the body were separated with great precision. All eyes in the courtroom were on Mariana, who was also a long-time nurse. Mariana answered all the questions and said that everyone knew she worked at the hospital, so they suspected that she was the one who dismembered the body. She further explained that using the internet, the matter could be cleared up. The judge ordered Maria and Mariana to be detained because this was a serious crime under the law. The crime was committed in a cold, calculated, reckless, and extremely cruel manner. A few months later, the trial took place on February 24, 2021. In her testimony at the trial on February 26, 2021, Maria stated that she initially sought revenge on Diogo for his violent behavior but did not intend to kill him. She admitted that her goal was to humiliate him. Maria also confirmed that her friend had no connection with Diogo and did not know about the murder. Maria argued that her actions were not motivated by Diogo's money. In addition, Maria and Mariana attended the trial together but avoided looking at each other. It was rumored that after their arrest and imprisonment, they ended their relationship. On April 27, 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Maria was found guilty of aggravated murder, complicity in indignity to a corpse, robbery, unlawful access, fraud, carjacking, and illegal possession of a weapon. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison and ordered to pay €265,000 in compensation to Diogo's father. Mariana was acquitted of murder but convicted of desecration of a corpse, complicity, and fraud. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison for these charges. However, she was released because the charges she was convicted of did not require pre-trial detention until the final verdict was delivered. The court determined that Mariana's attempt to revive Diogo showed that she had no intention of killing him. The judge took into account Mariana's confession, in which she accepted full responsibility for her actions. Despite this, the Portuguese public disagreed with the verdict, considering Mariana as guilty as Maria of the crimes against Diogo. After the verdict, Mariana left the court through the back door, where her father, who had attended all the hearings, was waiting for her. Neither Mariana nor her father would speak to reporters. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Joanne Nelson. Joanne Nelson was a cheerful and intelligent young woman who values the happiness of her loved ones over her own. Growing up in Hull, also known as Kingston upon Hull, on the east coast of Yorkshire, England, she lived with her parents. Her mother was a teaching assistant, and her father, Charlie, worked as an engineer for the city council. Joanne has a bubbly personality and excels both academically and socially. She is active in sports, enjoying netball, racquetball, and swimming. Although she is happy, she always dreamed of having her own family. Joanne originally pursued a career in medicine but found the role of a nurse difficult. She considered working abroad but eventually chose to work at a job center in Hull to be closer to family and friends. Joanne enjoys helping people find jobs and improve their skills, finding fulfillment in improving the lives of others. One day Joanne meets Paul. Before meeting Joanne, Paul had been in a number of serious relationships. In 1993, during his college years, he dated Carrie Thompson. Their relationship was short-lived, but Carrie reported Paul's violent behavior to the police. During arguments, he became violent, punching walls and assaulting Carrie. In 1999, Paul met Jenny Mary Clark. They married just 2 weeks after meeting, but their marriage quickly became a nightmare. On their wedding night, Paul attacked Jenny, and the abuse continued. He even choked her until she passed out. Despite these problems, Paul and Jenny decided to have children. Their daughter, Chloe, was born in 2000, and Paul and Jenny divorced shortly thereafter. When Chloe was 5, Jenny met Joanne and immediately recognized the challenges Joanne would face with Paul, as she seemed too naive to deal with such a difficult man. In 2002, Paul ended his relationship with Jenny and began dating Joanne Nelson. Their relationship began on the streets, where Paul worked as a bouncer in bars and clubs. At 27, he was experienced in relationships, while Joanne, 19, was just entering adulthood. Despite the age difference, they found support in each other, both seeking independence from their parents. Initially, they lived with Paul's mother before eventually buying their own home. However, their happiness gradually faded. Their arguments and conflicts increased. For Joanne, everything became too mundane and boring. Their differences began to strain the relationship. For example, she loved to be neat, while Paul was indifferent to it. On February 14, 2005, Joanne did not show up for work, which was unusual and worrying. On Valentine's Day 2005, Joanne Nelson mysteriously went missing. Paul was the one who reported the matter to the police. He claimed that he last saw Joanne when she was sleeping, then he left home and went to work. When he returned home, she had disappeared without a trace. Joanne, then 22, disappeared, leaving her family and friends extremely worried. The situation became even more confusing when she missed the funeral of her best friend's father and did not wish her younger sister Katie a happy 19th birthday. After the police declared Joanne missing, a large-scale search operation was launched, involving many law enforcement officers, the military, and volunteers. Since Joanne's disappearance, Joanne's father has been suspicious of Paul. Meanwhile, Katie finds it hard to believe that Paul is involved in this case because Paul has been actively involved in the search for Joanne. Paul has been working with volunteers and Joanne's family and friends. He also gave interviews to the press without the permission of Joanne's family. In a phone conversation with a reporter, Paul claimed that he had nothing to do with Joanne's disappearance. Paul asserted that his love for Joanne was real and that he could not harm her. However, a facial expression expert, Cliff, analyzed Paul's behavior during a television interview and found several suspicious signs. First, Paul did not close his eyes when talking about Joanne, which is not common for a grieving person. Second, Paul did not try to shed tears when talking about his lover. These unusual behaviors made people question whether Paul's words were truly sincere. Paul, the man who was involved in Joanne's disappearance, was eventually arrested after his mother disclosed information about his actions to the police. When questioned, Paul confessed that he had killed Joanne during an argument on Valentine's Day 2005. He said that the argument stemmed from Joanne constantly criticizing him for not doing his chores, especially when she asked him to help her wash her clothes, which angered him. When Joanne announced her plans to leave and forced him to sell the house, Paul became even angrier. In a fit of rage, Paul killed Joanne with his bare hands. He then remained calm and began to plan how to cover up the crime. He went to his mother's house, took a gardening tool, and chatted with the neighbors. He then went to the store to buy the necessary items for removing the evidence, including bin bags, rubber gloves, and disinfectant spray. The lead investigator discovered fingernail marks on the back of Paul's hand, which indicated that he had participated in the murder. This evidence confirmed Paul's confession and proved that he had committed the murder. Surveillance videos from a store near the scene of the crime showed Paul acting surprisingly calmly. Using the items he had purchased, he bound Joanne's hands and feet, stuffed her in a bag, and secured it with duct tape. He then carried her body to her car in broad daylight. After Paul hid Joanne's body in the car, he went to fill up with petrol in High Halden. He then drove about 75 miles to Bradbury Woodland, a remote forest near Winteringham in North Yorkshire. There, he carried Joanne's body for about 250 yards until he found a suitable place to bury her, among pine trees. He used branches to cover up the small hole where her body was buried. To cover up the crime, before going to work, Paul made a fake phone call to Joanne to deflect suspicion. The next day, he continued his daily life without showing any remorse for his heinous actions. Paul showed a frightening coldness by concealing his crime and continuing his normal life. After his confession, Paul said he did not remember exactly where he buried Joanne. However, he remembered that he buried Joanne in a metal gate and that there were some green bottles nearby. Detective Higgins said this information was very useful for the search. Because of Paul's suggestions, the police were able to start organizing the search by following a route through the woods. The search for Joanne lasted about 6 weeks and involved many people, including units from 3 counties working together on this grueling task. After 39 agonizing days of waiting, a team of detectives led by Ray Higgins finally found the remains of Joanne, 22, in Bransby near York. They followed Paul's description slowly. After walking about a quarter of a mile, they came upon a hole in the woods. Here they found a rubbish bag with what looked like a leg inside. It was Joanne's body wrapped in the bag. Paul, known for his history of sexual violence against women, kept his dark secrets hidden from Joanne's family and the public until the trial. At the time, he claimed to have mental health problems while working as a bouncer at the club. People who knew him from the gym said he often caused trouble at clubs and bars. The family later discovered that Paul had been taking steroids in an attempt to become a bodybuilder. Friends said he had previously been an alcoholic and that his rages may have been steroid-induced. Paul attended Sydney Smith School, then Hull College, where he completed a degree in civil engineering. He went on to study at Bishop Burton College, where he completed a degree in horticulture. Paul lived in Saudi Arabia, working with his father, Peter Dyson, in the maintenance industry. He also gained experience as a gardener and later worked as a mechanic for Pinal. From December 2004, Paul worked at Byam Timber on Somerton Road as a timber cutter until his arrest. At 15, he met Colin Allen, a martial arts expert, and they became friends. Paul confessed to the murder to Colin, leading to his arrest. Friends said he had a distorted view of himself, seeing himself as charming and attractive to women. He often used his job as a security guard to approach girls from higher social classes. On the first day of the trial, November 7, 2005, Paul surprised the entire courtroom by pleading guilty. Joanne's family was completely shocked by the confession, as they had anticipated a long, intense trial. When Paul pleaded guilty, Joanne's family said yes in unison. Afterwards, he simply looked straight ahead or kept his head down, avoiding looking at Joanne's relatives and the police. He showed no emotion on his face, even as the charges were announced. His lawyer, Harry Barl, told the court that there was no excuse for his actions. On November 8, nearly 10 months after the murder, Paul was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years to serve. Surprisingly, in November 2019, after just 14 years, Paul, then 45, was transferred to an open prison and released on day release. The reason was that the parole board found that Paul had actively participated in a self-awareness development program and successfully completed a social improvement program. The easing of Paul's detention conditions and his day release caused deep emotional distress for Joanne's family. Katie, Joanne's sister, expressed to the media that they felt lost and unsure of how to handle the news. Paul's release brought back painful memories of Joanne's death, and the family believed he did not deserve a reduced sentence for his actions. Katie emphasized that Paul's crime was serious and premeditated, making his early release a challenging ordeal for the family. They fear he might return to their city of Hull and commit further harm, as they have been unable to secure a restriction order against him. Although there is no confirmed information about Paul's return to the city, he remains under probation supervision. Any violation of his terms or the law will result in his return to prison. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Suzanne Morphew. Suzanne Morphew was born on April 11, 1971, to Jean and Adrian Alexandria. She grew up with two brothers, David and Andrew. Those close to her knew she was a special friend, known for her intelligence and thoughtfulness. In 1998, while still in high school, Suzanne met Barry Morphew. After 6 years of dating, they got married. Barry initially pursued a baseball career, signing with the Toronto Blue Jays, while Suzanne pursued a degree in education at Purdue University. However, after a severe injury cut his sports career short, Barry transitioned into horticulture. Suzanne had 4 years of teaching experience when Barry started his own business, and the company gradually grew over time. The couple had 2 children, Mallory and Macy. They led an idyllic life in Indiana but faced a setback when Suzanne was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Despite this challenge, Suzanne successfully battled cancer twice. The family eventually moved to Mayville, Colorado, in 2018 in search of a fresh start and to be near their daughter Mallory, who was attending Western State University. The Suzanne moved to a beautiful 7-acre property that allowed Barry to pursue his love of hunting. He continued working as a contractor and also became a volunteer fireman. Suzanne, on the other hand, retired from her teaching career and devoted more time to her church and a new hobby, sports mountain biking. To outsiders, the Suzannes seemed like the perfect family. However, but they had their share of problems. These issues were finally revealed on May 10, 2020. Monday, May 10, 2020, was unlike any other Mother's Day celebration at Suzanne's house. While Suzanne was home alone, her husband Barry and their daughters were out. Barry claimed he had a landscaping appointment in Broomfield, about a 3-hour drive from home, and their children went on a camping trip. They all planned to return home in the evening to celebrate Suzanne's special day. However, when Mallory and Macy messaged their mother to wish her happy Mother's Day, they didn't receive a response. This was unusual because Suzanne was very active on social media. The girls expected her to be checking her phone for updates, especially since a friend's daughter's wedding was taking place and Suzanne would likely want to see photos. After waiting a few hours without hearing back, the girls grew concerned. They asked their neighbor, Martin Ritter, and his wife for help. Around 4 o'clock or 4:30 p.m. that day, Mrs. Ritter visited the Suzanne house and found it empty. She called Barry to explain the situation and he instructed her to look for Suzanne's mountain bike. If the bike was missing, he told her to contact the police. That's exactly what she did, and soon the police arrived at the Suzanne residence. Barry and their daughters returned home, they anxious to know news of Suzanne's whereabouts. A few hours into the search, the police found a crucial clue. Deputies discovered Suzanne's mountain bike in a steep ravine near the home. The location hinted that Suzanne might have been involved in an accident, but the bike and the surrounding area showed no signs of a struggle. Notably, there were no skid marks from the brakes, no damage to the bike despite its fall down the ravine, no bloodstains, and the nearby lawn appeared untouched. This evidence led the deputies to conclude that the bike had been deliberately placed in the ravine. When they shared this information with Barry, his reaction was unusual. As the investigation into his wife's disappearance proceeded, Barry shared many more implausible stories. As the investigation progressed, his behavior made it obvious that he didn't truly care for his wife. This led to unanswered questions and speculation about Suzanne's disappearance, leading many to suspect Barry's involvement. Barry gave details about his mountain lion story in a secretly recorded conversation with YouTuber Tyson Draper. Notably, Barry was absent from the search parties for Suzanne, organized by her brother Andrew. Andrew doubts Barry's story and offers another possibility: Suzanne actually went missing on May 9th, not on Mother's Day as Barry claimed. It was also discovered that Suzanne's helmet was found 1 mile from their home, in the same direction Barry's truck had traveled that morning. Investigators initially considered this an odd coincidence, but it became more significant when they discovered it was in the opposite direction of the construction site he was set to visit that day. In his initial interview, Barry said he woke up at 4:30 a.m. to an alarm clock and immediately left for Broomfield. However, telematic data from his Ford truck showed he drove 1 mile west before heading to the construction site. When confronted with this data, Barry explained that he was scouting elk earlier that morning. He then anesthetized them and sold their antlers, which was his habit. However, the officers pointed out a flaw in Barry's story. He couldn't have spotted the elk at 4:30 a.m. if he was just waking up. To address this, Barry changed his story, saying he didn't set his alarm for 4:30 a.m. and got up on his own. When asked about the day of Suzanne's disappearance, Barry described it as one of the best days they had had after a long time. He said that morning, he worked briefly with a coworker in Salida and then returned home early. After that, he went on a hike with Suzanne, followed by a grilled steak dinner and intimacy. Barry stated they went to bed together. However, it is essential to note that Barry is not a reliable source of information. During the police investigation into Barry, it was discovered that he had lied about the whole thing that happened that night. The first signs of deception were uncovered by investigators on May 9, 2020, when they reviewed the telematic data from Barry's vehicle and his phone records. Although Barry had indeed spent the afternoon and evening with Suzanne, the details did not match his initial story. One of the discrepancies occurred between 10:42 and 10:47. According to his phone data, Barry's movements around the property were unusual. When questioned by investigators about this inconsistency, Barry claimed he was probably hunting chipmunks with tranquilizers at the time. It was also revealed that Barry had switched his phone to airplane mode at 2:47 p.m. and left it in that mode until 10:17 p.m., which further raised suspicions. Additionally, investigators found evidence that contradicted Barry's claim of having a steak dinner with his wife. They discovered only one dirty dish, suggesting that Barry had eaten alone. As the investigation continued, more unusual occurrences were discovered on their plot of land. The police found additional suspicious details while reviewing the data from later that night. 1 hour after Barry claimed to have gone to sleep with his wife at 8:30 p.m., his car was seen backing up 96 feet from the driveway at 9:30 p.m. This led investigators to speculate that this could be when Barry loaded his wife's body into the truck. If he was indeed guilty. Furthermore, the records showed that between 3:25 and 3:48, the truck door opened and closed over 80 times, which, although indirect, suggested that Barry might be hiding something from the police, causing them must dig deeper into the incident that occurred on May 10th. Investigations involving Barry co-workers revealed that he had no reason to be in Broomfield on the day in question. The contract didn't start until a week later, so there was no project to inspect. Barry initially claimed that his only activities that day involved visiting the Holiday Inn, the work site for an upcoming project, a store for granola and water, and a stop at McDonald's to clean his windshield. However, surveillance footage obtained by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation contradicted his story. The footage showed that Barry disposed of 5 trash bags near the Holiday Inn and McDonald's. This increases suspicion about his actions. When police questioned Barry about the footage of him disposing of trash bags he gave an unusual explanation. He claimed that he wanted to avoid paying for disposal fees so he could clean his car. However, his story fell apart when officers searched his vehicle. Barry's suspicious behavior was further highlighted by a coworker who reported a strong smell of bleach and chlorine in his hotel room a day after Suzanne disappeared. In addition, investigators found that Barry had changed his clothes multiple times throughout that day. Investigators then delved deeper into Barry and Suzanne's personal lives. Their daughter revealed that her parents' marriage was not as happy as Barry had initially suggested. Text messages on Suzanne's phone confirmed this. Suzanne was deeply unhappy in the marriage and discussed her desire for a divorce, which Barry refused. Suzanne kept a list of grievances in her notes app, detailing a pattern of physical abuse by her husband Barry. She expressed fear of being alone with him and was concerned about his heavy drinking and attempts to take her phone. Suzanne also suspected him of being unfaithful. In an attempt to catch him in the act, she purchased a pen with a hidden recording device, but it ironically captured evidence of her own affair instead. The investigation revealed that Suzanne had been having an affair with a man named Jeff, a high school acquaintance, for about a year and a half, starting in 2018. Although Jeff initially appeared to be a potential suspect, he was later cleared of any involvement in Suzanne's disappearance. However, investigators discovered a note that suggested Barry had found out about the affair and might have accused her of having a boyfriend just 2 days before she went missing. During their search of the Suzanne house, police uncovered several crucial pieces of evidence, including the cap of a tranquilizer dart in the dryer and the spent bullet casing in the bedroom. They also found a large crack in the doorframe and a charred remnant of Suzanne's journal in the fireplace. These findings, combined with telematic data, suggested that Barry might have killed Suzanne on May 9, 2020. Phone records from Suzanne's phone supported her initial story. After texting Jeff 53 times and sending a selfie at approximately 2:10 p.m., the phone showed no further activity. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that the public discovered Barry was a suspect in his wife's disappearance. This revelation came when police excavated a construction site in Salida, one of Barry's job sites, over the course of 2 days. In response, Barry released a video to the public maintaining his innocence. It was not until May 5, 2021, nearly a year into the investigation, that Barry was arrested. While the evidence against him was largely circumstantial, the prosecution felt confident in their case. Due to the inconsistencies in Barry's alibis, his repeated lies, and a clear motive. Barry was charged with multiple crimes, including the first-degree murder of his wife, tampering with physical evidence, possessing a dangerous weapon, and attempting to influence a public servant. Barry accepted the charges and paid a $600 fine. A preliminary hearing took place in August 2021 to decide if the case should go to trial, at which point most of the case details were made public. The prosecution presented its evidence over 4 days, outlining its theory of the incident. They claimed that on May 9, 2020, Barry killed his wife, dismembered her body in a hotel room, disposed of the tools, and buried her remains in an unmarked grave. However, Barry's defense strongly challenged the prosecution's narrative, pointing out inconsistencies in their story. They cited that cadaver dogs found no signs of human remains in Barry's car or the hotel room where he supposedly brought the body. The defense also raised doubts about the dart bullet cover, suggesting it may have been planted. Furthermore, the defense argued that Barry's dart gun was broken at the time, making it impossible for him to use it in the murder. The defense team's apparently piece of evidence was partial DNA found in Suzanne's Range Rover and on her bike helmet, which didn't match Barry. What made this discovery significant was that the DNA in her car matched DNA profiles from 3 unsolved sexual assault cases in Chicago and Arizona. This raised doubt about Barry's guilt. However, the CBI investigator in charge of the case was unable to present this crucial evidence earlier because he had to take a leave of absence for military service before. It wasn't until September 7th that the judge decided to move forward with the case, setting Barry's bail at $500,000. He was released from county jail on September 20th, 2021. However, in a surprising move, the prosecution filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Barry without prejudice. At the time, the prosecution faced several challenges, including a lack of concrete evidence, as no body had been found. Additionally, the prosecution had missed multiple deadlines, resulting in the exclusion of 14 key witnesses from the trial. Barry was seen leaving the courthouse with his 2 daughters, visibly relieved. Nearly 2 years later, on September 22, 2023, investigators made a breakthrough in the case when they discovered several shallow graves in Moffat, Colorado. Suzanne's remains were identified through dental records and a chemotherapy port, found over 50 miles away from the initial search area. The discovery of Suzanne's body has raised fresh questions about Barry's potential involvement in her murder. Although the charges against him were previously dismissed, the new evidence has led many to wonder if he could still be considered a suspect in the case. Some people question how Barry could have disposed of the body without being in Moffat on May 9th and 10th, suggesting he might have had help. For now, Barry does not appear to be directly involved in where his wife's body was found. The police and district attorney's office continue to investigate the case. The 12th Judicial District's district attorney stated that they cannot comment on the case until more information becomes available, while offering condolences to Suzanne's family. Barry's attorney, Iris E.T. Yen, speculates that Suzanne might have been the victim of a serial killer. After finding her remains in a cemetery, Iris thinks that law enforcement wrongly accused Barry and hopes that they will admit their mistake. Barry has initiated a $15 million lawsuit against the prosecutors, sheriff stations, and investigators because he was wrongly accused in the disappearance and death of his wife. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Rhonda Casto. Julia Simmons lives with Stephen Nichols, a divorced stock trader, in his 3-bedroom house outside Portland, Oregon. Julia and Stephen met online while she was looking for a place to rent. Julia was impressed by Stephen's charm and kindness. While living together, Stephen met Rhonda Casto, Julia's 20-year-old daughter. Although he is 10 years older than Rhonda, Stephen was attracted to her beauty and admirable personality. Surprisingly, Rhonda also had feelings for Stephen. From there, they began a romantic relationship. As Stephen and Rhonda's relationship became more serious, they decided to live together in Stephen's apartment. During their relationship, Stephen developed a close relationship with Rhonda's family, especially with her 2 sisters, Melanie and Tessa. Tessa, who was 9 years old at the time, was very fond of Stephen because of his fun and playful personality. As the years passed, Stephen and Rhonda lived together but were not married. Rhonda often dreamed of getting married, and her friends knew this. Stephen promised to marry her in the summer of 2009. They had a baby girl, and motherhood became the best thing in Rhonda's life. Her daughter became the center of Rhonda's life, and she cherished every moment with her. She loved being a mother, but also wanted to return to her modeling career. According to Stephen, after giving birth, Rhonda gained a lot of weight and felt unhappy with her body. They decided to hike 25 of the most beautiful trails in Oregon together to help Rhonda lose weight. Stephen said that their relationship was good, they rarely argued and became closer. However, Rhonda's friends told a different story. They revealed that Rhonda had confided in them about Stephen's abuse. Rhonda even took pictures of her back in the mirror to document the bruises Stephen had caused. On March 16, 2009, Stephen and Rhonda, both 23 years old, went hiking together on the Eagle Creek Trail. During the hike, Rhonda took a picture of Stephen using his cell phone. Before leaving, Rhonda jokingly texted her mother, saying, "He's either going to give me a ring or throw me off a cliff. Haha." Initially, the weather was nice. However, Stephen later said that Rhonda began to act strangely. According to Stephen, Rhonda asked him what would happen if something happened to her and if he would take care of their daughter. He replied that of course he would. When the weather started to get worse, Stephen suggested that they go home. Stephen said that Rhonda wrapped a towel around her shoulders, called herself Superman, and ran down the narrow, slippery path. Stephen said he witnessed Rhonda slip and fall about 150 feet down the cliff on the Eagle Creek Trail. Stephen said he went down the ravine where Rhonda fell because he couldn't get a cell phone and held her body. He tried to call 911 but got no signal, so he left Rhonda and walked to the trailhead to contact rescuers. Rescuers then took Rhonda's body away. Rhonda's family claimed that Stephen showed no emotion at the funeral, but Stephen denied this and said that he cried a lot. He explained that when he was really sad, he would pull away from people and want to be alone. Immediately after Rhonda's death, Stephen quickly packed up his and his daughter's belongings and moved to the other side of Oregon to be closer to his family. This move left Rhonda's family feeling suspicious and wondering what had happened between Stephen and Rhonda in the final moments before she died. In 2012, Stephen decided to leave the United States to live with his daughter in China. This decision marked a new turning point in the lives of both father and daughter. Stephen decided to move to Wuxi, a city about 75 miles from Shanghai. He had lived in China during his previous marriage and had developed a deep love for the country and its people. During his time in China, Stephen worked as a teacher of English to Chinese businessmen. His and Rhonda's daughter, Ava, quickly adapted to her new life. Within 2 months of moving in, she was speaking fluent Mandarin. Both Stephen and his daughter are thriving and happy in China. Stephen met and fell in love with Landy Yen. Landy and Ava formed a strong bond, with Landy taking on the role of a mother figure. Stephen appreciated how Landy had stepped in and embraced the role of a parental figure to his daughter. After a year of dating, Stephen decided to take the next step in their relationship by proposing to Landy. He was very happy when she said yes. In February 2015, Stephen and Landy returned to the United States to prepare for their wedding. They decided to have 2 wedding ceremonies, one in the United States and one in China, to accommodate both families and friends. Stephen and his daughter arrived in the United States the day before Landy. When they got off the plane in San Francisco to transfer to Oregon, Stephen was approached by police and informed that they needed to arrest him for baggage issues. Stephen had no idea that this would lead to a series of events that would change his life forever. Within minutes, the police separated Stephen from his daughter. Little did he know that while he was in China, detectives had been investigating the death of his ex-girlfriend Rhonda. The suspicious circumstances surrounding Rhonda's fall from Eagle Creek prompted them to continue their investigation, and they eventually concluded that Stephen was responsible for her death. Rhonda's mother was instrumental in keeping the investigation moving forward. She regularly contacted the detectives to keep them updated. The police arrested Stephen at the airport for Rhonda's murder and took him back to Oregon. When he was arrested, Stephen claimed that he thought he was dreaming. Stephen hoped to open his eyes and find himself back home in China with Landy. However, This was not a dream, but reality. Stephen's bail was set at $2 million. He was jailed for 14 months awaiting trial. The judge reduced Stephen's bail to $250,000, which his attorney paid. Stephen was released on bail but must wear an ankle monitor. When Rhonda's family learned of Stephen's arrest for murder, they were overjoyed that justice had finally been served. Rhonda's mother, in particular, was overcome with emotion and burst into tears upon hearing the news. Stephen's arrest brought relief and comfort to Rhonda's family, who had been grieving her loss for years. After Stephen's arrest, his legal team conducted an investigation at the Eagle Creek trailhead where Rhonda died. Their goal was to conduct tests that would prove to the court that Rhonda's death was the result of a slip and fall accident, not Stephen's pushing her. During a preliminary hearing, Rhonda's autopsy revealed that all of her injuries were below the waist. This finding became a key element of Stephen's defense strategy, providing the basis for arguing that Rhonda committed suicide, not murder. Stephen's defense argued that Rhonda's pelvic injuries were caused by the impact of her fall. They argued that the evidence showed that Rhonda fell feet first, not somersaulting, suggesting that she had been pushed. In addition to presenting evidence of Rhonda's injuries, the defense also wanted to introduce notes from her therapy sessions as additional evidence. The notes show that Rhonda was depressed but never suicidal. Rhonda also described her relationship with Stephen as lacking love. Stephen's defense attorney argued that Rhonda's depression and the way she described the relationship were signs that she was suicidal. They introduced this evidence to cast doubt on the claim that Stephen pushed Rhonda to cause her death. Stephen also claimed that Rhonda had attempted suicide multiple times before they met. Rhonda's family denied these allegations and said Stephen was lying. They accused Stephen of blaming Rhonda for her suicide to cover up his crimes. Stephen also claimed that Rhonda had been abusing drugs since she was 12 years old. According to the medical examiner's report, Rhonda used only small amounts of marijuana and prescription medications to treat postpartum depression and anxiety. This contradicts his claim that she abused multiple substances. During the preliminary hearing for Rhonda's murder, a shocking revelation was made. Stephen, in his early 30s, had been having an affair with Rhonda's 16-year-old sister, Melanie. This came as a surprise to many due to the significant age difference between them. The prosecution argued that this inappropriate relationship may have been the motive for Stephen's murder of Rhonda. They believed that Rhonda had discovered her husband's behavior, leading to tension that may have led Stephen to kill her. After being arrested for Rhonda's murder, Stephen was indicted on 5 additional counts of sexual abuse against Rhonda's sister, Melanie Casto. Specifically, 2 counts of third-degree sexual assault and 3 counts of third-degree oral copulation. While awaiting trial for the 2005 murder, Stephen pleaded guilty to 2 counts of sexual abuse. He signed a statement admitting to having sex with Melanie Casto on 2 occasions. However, Stephen later claimed that he was coerced into confessing and that his confession was untrue. Stephen explained that he only confessed because he believed doing so would allow him to fight and have a chance to regain custody of his daughter. Stephen claimed that he wanted his daughter back and felt desperate. However, the state pointed out that the relationship between Stephen and Melanie had lasted for more than 4 years. Stephen later admitted to having sex with Rhonda's teenage sister, Melanie. The state presented evidence in the form of a text message from Rhonda to Melanie. In the text message, Rhonda called Stephen a piece of trash and accused him of using Melanie to hurt her. This occurred before the fateful hike at Eagle Creek, where Rhonda died after falling. Rhonda's mother claimed that her daughter knew that Stephen was trying to drive a wedge between the 2 sisters. She added that Rhonda loved her sister and wanted to mend her relationship with Melanie. The state concluded that Rhonda and Stephen's relationship was not as amicable as Stephen claimed. The court received additional evidence of Stephen's past sexual misconduct. Just 6 months after his daughter's mother died, Stephen was arrested and charged with 5 counts of sexual abuse of a 13-year-old girl. Although he initially denied it, Stephen later admitted to sending sexually explicit text messages and nude photos to the victim. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of sexual harassment. During the preliminary hearing, the prosecutor presented photos of bruises on Rhonda's back. Rhonda's best friend testified that she had heard Rhonda and Stephen arguing on the phone on multiple occasions. This evidence suggested that the relationship between Stephen and Rhonda was abusive. In addition to the photographic evidence, the court heard testimony from Stephen's ex-wife, who alleged that in November 2003, Stephen tried to strangle her and throw her over the balcony of their 5th-floor apartment. However, Stephen was not charged and denied all charges. For their part, Rhonda's family firmly believes that Stephen, her boyfriend, is responsible for Rhonda's death. Police suspect he killed Rhonda to collect her life insurance. Her mother said Stephen had lost a lot of money trading stocks the previous year and was struggling financially. In addition, people who knew Rhonda said she loved her 9-month-old daughter very much and could not have killed herself by jumping into Eagle Creek. In May 2017, Rhonda's family was shocked to learn that the state had reached a plea deal with the defense attorney. Stephen pleaded guilty to manslaughter based on criminal negligence. Although he believed he killed her, the lack of physical evidence that he pushed her off the trail in Eagle Creek made the case weak. Stephen was given credit for time served while awaiting trial, but was given 3 years of probation. After removing his ankle monitor, Stephen was released. Rhonda's family and friends said Stephen's plea deal was unfair and that he deserved a harsher sentence. During the sentencing hearing, Rhonda's sister gave an emotional statement. She expressed anger and frustration toward Stephen, saying that he had destroyed their family and caused immeasurable pain. Rhonda's mother also expressed confusion and grief, unable to understand how Stephen could have taken her daughter away from her and torn their family apart. Stephen insisted that he did not force Rhonda, but accepted the deal because the time limit for regaining custody of his daughter was about to expire. He said that he was willing to take responsibility for his actions for the sake of his daughter. However, Rhonda's family and friends still did not believe Stephen's explanation. In a 2018 interview, Stephen made a shocking statement about Rhonda's fate. According to Stephen, on the day of Rhonda's accident, when he walked down the Eagle Creek Trail and found her, Rhonda was still alive. The interviewer then asked Stephen if he had put Rhonda out of pain that day. Stephen responded by presenting a hypothetical scenario of mercy killing. He argued that such an act could be considered justifiable homicide, although it would still be murder. Although Stephen did not directly admit to harming Rhonda, his comments implied that he was involved in her death. In 2017, Rhonda's mother filed for Social Security benefits for her niece, Rhonda's daughter, Ava. She claimed that her niece lived with her and promised to use the benefits to care for the baby. However, the state alleges that from April 2010 to December 2014, the time Rhonda's mother claimed her niece lived with her, the child actually lived with her biological father, Stephen. Rhonda's mother is accused of stealing nearly $40,000 from the government over a 5-year period. Her defense attorney argued that her actions were motivated by a desire to prevent Stephen from gaining custody of Rhonda's daughter and from benefiting from Rhonda's $1 million life insurance policy. According to the attorney, Rhonda's mother's goal was to protect her granddaughter from being taken advantage of. They also pointed out that she had a history of depression, which became worse after her daughter died. To cope with the pain, she used marijuana as a way to self-medicate. The defense argued that her use of the drug impaired her judgment and thinking. The judge sentenced Rhonda's mother, 53, to 1 month in prison and 3 years of probation after she pleaded guilty to welfare fraud. In addition to the sentence, she was ordered to repay $39,100 in stolen benefits. Rhonda and Stephen's daughter was placed in foster care in October 2015, after the Department of Human Services stripped them of parental rights. The decision came after Stephen pleaded guilty to sexually abusing a 13-year-old girl. The Oregon court eventually stripped him of his parental rights. However, Stephen has appealed the decision. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Crystal Rogers. Crystal Rogers, a 35-year-old mother of 4 from Bardstown, Kentucky, was known for her strong devotion to her children. She and her ex-husband Keith shared custody of their children. Despite the divorce, she maintained a friendly relationship with him for the sake of the children. At the time, her 2-year-old youngest son was with her current boyfriend, Brooks Houck. On July 5, 2015, Crystal's mother, Sherry Ballard, became worried when Crystal didn't respond to her phone calls. Crystal was a reliable and responsible who always responded to her calls, but this time Crystal was unresponsive. As the hours passed, Sherry's worry intensified, and after 24 hours without hearing from her daughter, she realized something was amiss. Sherry's instincts as a mother told her that Crystal's absence was unusual. She tried contacting Crystal multiple times, but her efforts were in vain. Sherry then reached out to Crystal's friends and family, hoping someone might know where she was, but no one had seen or spoken with her recently. Around the same time, Crystal's younger sister Brooke contacted Sherry, informing her mother that she too had been unable to reach Crystal. This makes Sherry even more worried and insecure. Crystal's boyfriend, Brooks, told her family that he had not seen her since Friday. He last saw her playing games on her phone before he went to bed. When he woke up the next morning, Crystal was gone. Brooks suspected she might have visited her cousin's house for the 4th of July celebrations. However, Crystal's mother, Sherry, became increasingly worried as she couldn't reach her daughter. She reported Crystal missing to the police department. While she was there, her son Casey received a call from a friend saying Crystal's car had been seen on the side of the road. This news alarmed Casey and his father, Tommy Ballard. They knew Crystal wouldn't voluntarily leave her car. When they arrived at the location, they found her car with a flat tire. This only deepened their concern, as they knew Crystal would have asked for help if she had car trouble. Casey and Tommy were puzzled as to why Crystal would stop the car to fix it herself. When they looked into the car, they noticed that Crystal's keys, phone, and wallet were still on the passenger seat. This discovery made them even more worried, as Crystal was not someone who would leave her belongings behind. The fact that her personal belongings were still in the car made her disappearance seem even more suspicious and unusual. After discovering Crystal's car on the Bluegrass Parkway, her father and brother immediately contacted the Nelson County Sheriff's Department. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found no signs of struggle, but one thing caught their attention: the driver's seat was positioned in a way that would have been uncomfortable for someone of Crystal's height, suggesting that someone else may have driven her car. The authorities continued to investigate and asked for help from potential witnesses. However, no one came forward with any useful information. The police then decided to use the media to appeal for public assistance in finding Crystal. They released her photo and asked for the public's help, but unfortunately, no one provided any significant leads. Tommy, Crystal's father, arranged search parties to find Crystal. The hot and humid weather made the searches challenging. Despite a large turnout, Crystal's boyfriend, Brooks, was absent. This made the police suspicious of his attitude. He seemed unconcerned about her disappearance. When questioned by detectives, Brooks provided an alibi, stating that Crystal and their young son had visited his family's farm the previous evening. They supposedly returned home around midnight, after which Brooks went to bed. He claimed Crystal stayed awake, engaged with her phone, playing games, as was her habit. In the morning, at 7 a.m., Brooks said their son was in bed with him, but Crystal was gone. Crystal's family initially suspected she might have gone out with her cousin. But those close to her dismissed this idea since she would never leave her 2-year-old son behind. Crystal's younger sister, Brooke, believed Crystal was planning to leave her partner, Brooks. According to Brooke, this was because Brooks had been dishonest with Crystal and lack of emotional attachment. Crystal told her mother, Sherry, that she wanted to leave Brooks. She said one of the main reasons was his controlling behavior towards her. Casey, Crystal's brother, had recently witnessed tension between Brooks and Crystal, including several heated arguments. The police asked Brooks to come in for questioning and take a polygraph test, but the results are not clear. Afterward, Brooks participated in a formal interview with the police. Detectives obtained video footage confirming details of Brooks' story. A video showed his truck entering the family farm, and later footage showed the vehicle leaving the property around midnight. However, because the windows of Brooks' truck were dark, police were unable to identify the occupants at the time. Brooks spent time at his parents' farm doing chores and setting a fire to burn some building materials. After for the fire to die down, he drove home. During a police interview, Brooks was questioned about a brief 13-second phone call he made to Steve Lawson, a business associate, while driving home. Brooks offered to have Steve explain the call to the police and asked him to call them during the interview. Steve claimed he called Brooks to get some phone numbers for a rental property, but Brooks said he needed to get home first and ask Crystal, who handled such matters. However, the police found Lawson's explanation suspicious, as it seemed rehearsed. The police were puzzled by this response, considering Brooks was with Crystal at the time of the call. They questioned why Brooks couldn't simply hand Crystal the phone, allowing her to discuss the issue immediately, rather than waiting to talk to her in person later. During Brooks's interview, his brother Nick, a Bardstown Police Department officer, called him with urgent advice to leave the interrogation room immediately. The police had doubts about their initial theory that Crystal had abandoned her car on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway and ran away. Instead, they suspected that something had happened to Crystal while she was at the Brooks family farm. As the investigation into Crystal's disappearance progressed, several people reported seeing Brooks's truck and Nick's police car at his family farm to the police. This led detectives to believe that the brothers might have been at the farm to dispose of evidence related to Crystal's disappearance. To learn more, the police brought in Brooks's brother, Nick, for questioning. They confronted him with eyewitness accounts placing that him at the farm on July 8 and asked him to explain his emergence there. Nick initially claimed he had no knowledge of the incident surrounding Crystal's disappearance and denied being present that night. The police continued questioning him, directly asking if he and Brooks had tampered with or hidden evidence related to Crystal's disappearance. Nick strongly denied any involvement and assured them that, as a police officer, he would never aid in covering up a crime. The police then asked Nick to submit to a polygraph test, which he agreed to. However, he failed to answer truthfully to two key questions: whether he knew Crystal's current location and if he was withholding information about her disappearance. Despite failing the polygraph test, Nick insisted that he was telling the truth. On October 15th, investigators identified Brooks as the primary suspect in Crystal's disappearance. The same day, Brooks's brother, Nick, was terminated from the Bardstown Police Department for interfering with the investigation. Although the police were pretty sure they knew who the culprit was, they didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest. The police were concerned that if they took their suspect to court without sufficient evidence, the suspect might be acquitted. If that happened, they couldn't charge the suspect with Crystal's murder again, due to the double jeopardy law. To help find more evidence, the FBI, Kentucky law enforcement agencies, Crystal's friends and family, volunteers, and missing people organizations conducted thorough searches at the Brooks family farm. The lengthy search left her loved ones terrified and desperate for news. As the search continued, her family remained hopeful that she would be found alive and well. At the Brooks family farm, investigators searched the ashes of a fire and, although they did not find any human remains, they did find pieces of clothing. Unfortunately, they were unable to link these clues to Crystal's case. The police executed multiple search warrants at the Brooks family farm, focusing on their cars and residences. However, these searches failed to yield significant leads or evidence related to Crystal's disappearance. A $100,000 reward was offered for any information that could help find Crystal, but unfortunately, no one stepped forward with any tips despite this large incentive. Tommy, Crystal's father, took it upon himself to investigate his daughter's disappearance, following every lead he received, no matter how small or insignificant it may have seemed. His determination was unwavering, driven by his love for Crystal. Unfortunately, Tommy had already faced a devastating loss in his family. In January 1979, his pregnant sister was brutally murdered by her husband and his accomplice. The perpetrators shot and beat her, set her remains on fire, and scattered them on a farm. Although it took years, but the suspects were eventually arrested, found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison. Tommy remained committed to finding out what happened to his daughter Crystal, despite the many challenges he faced. He conducted his own investigation, canvassing the neighborhood, conducting interviews, and reaching out to anyone who might have information about his daughter's disappearance. To aid in his search, Tommy also utilized his own savings to hire private investigators and cadaver dogs. To keep track of the investigation, Tommy carefully documented every tip every clue he found. He worked with the police, sharing his discoveries and asking for their advice. November 2016, Tommy took his 11-year-old grandson, Crystal's son, on a hunting trip on their property early in the morning. As they left, Tommy's wife Sherry watched them go, feeling uneasy. She couldn't help but pray for their safety in the woods. Sherry tried to calm down after they left, but her peace was short-lived. Just minutes later, she received a frantic phone call from her grandson, Crystal's son. His voice shook with fear. He then exclaimed, "Mimo, Papa has been shot." Sherry's world came crashing down. Her nephew's panicked voice on the phone told her something terrible had happened. She quickly threw on some clothes and rushed to call 911, and she reassured her distressed grandson that help was on the way. Her mind was flooded with fears of what might have happened to her husband, Tommy. When Sherry arrived at the scene, she witnessed a horrifying sight: her husband lying on the ground, unresponsive. Distraught, she rushed to his side and tried to wake him up, hoping he would respond. But her efforts only revealed a grim truth: blood was pouring out of his nose. The officers and bystanders at the scene quickly pulled her away so that the medical team could try to save him, but it was too late. Tommy was pronounced dead. The initial police reports suggested that Tommy's death was the result of a hunting accident. However, Sherry knew this could not be true. She was adamant that her husband had been murdered, and she made her feelings clear to the authorities. "This is no accident," she insisted. "This is she husband, and it's a murder, and you know it." During the investigation, the investigators was found that Tommy's own gun had not been used, making it unlikely that he had committed suicide. The investigators then determined that Tommy's 11-year-old grandson was not involved in the shooting. As the investigation progressed and more facts came to light, Sherry's suspicion that her husband's death was indeed a murder gained credibility. The Kentucky State Police have informed the public that they are treating Tommy Ballard's death as a murder. The Tommy family believes that he was killed because he was getting close to discovering what happened to his missing daughter, Crystal. They think the people responsible for Crystal's disappearance felt threatened by Tommy's investigation and had him murdered to prevent the truth from coming out. In 2022, the FBI conducted a 5-day investigation into Crystal's disappearance. Investigators returned to the Brooks family farm to search for more evidence, with the goal of gathering enough information to hold suspects for Crystal's disappearance accountable. In October 2022, the FBI confirmed that it would analyze all evidence collected at its lab in Quantico. As the investigation into Crystal's disappearance continued, the Kentucky Attorney General appointed a special prosecutor to help prosecute criminal charges related to the deaths of Crystal Rogers and her father, Tommy. Crystal's mother, Sherry, was aware of and fully supported the decision to appoint a special prosecutor. She believed the move was necessary to ensure justice for her husband and daughter, and she viewed the appointment as a positive development that brought new perspective and expertise to the case. The decision to appoint a special prosecutor also showed that the case was being taken seriously and that those responsible would be held accountable. On September 2023, authorities arrested Crystal's boyfriend, Brooks Houck, and charged him with murder and tampering with physical evidence. The court set Brooks' bail at $10 million and prohibited him from contacting Crystal's family members. Notably, Brooks was previously arrested in 2022 for multiple traffic offenses and was released after paying a series of fines. When Brooks was arrested for Crystal's murder, many in Bardstown brought a sense of relief. While the confirmation of Crystal's death was devastating, the community was relieved to know that justice was being pursued, bringing some sense of closure to the case. 1 month after his arrest, in October 2023, Brooks appeared in court for the first time, though virtually rather than in person. The judge inquired if the special prosecutor, Shane Young, was investigating other cases related to Crystal's case. The prosecutor confirmed that they were looking into the death of Tommy, Crystal's father, and suspected a connection between the two murders. Notably, Shane Young believed they had obtained the gun used to kill Tommy. The firearm was reportedly purchased from Nick, who allegedly used an alias during the transaction. Preliminary investigations revealed that the caliber of the rifle matched the one used in Tommy's shooting. Shane Young stated that they were examining the gun based on 5 key criteria. So far, the results have matched 4 of these criteria, suggesting a possible link between the firearm and Tommy's murder. Crystal's grandfather felt relief when the special prosecutors, Shane Young, connected the 2 murders in court. They hoped for a swift and fair outcome in both cases. However, when questioned about the allegations by Shane Young, Brooks and Brooks' mother refused to answer any questions. During the court hearing, the prosecutor alleged that the Brooks family had secretly recorded the grand jury proceedings. The prosecutor claimed that several family members Brooks were involved in this activity. Brooks' attorneys requested that the Nelson County judge be removed from the case, citing bias. They claim that the judge has had a hostile view of Brooks since 2017. The attorneys also argued that the $10 million bail is excessive and should be reconsidered. Attorneys representing Brooks argued that having a biased judge hear the case would be unfair to him. The lawyers argued that the judge's previous statements and actions showed that he was unfair. They asked the court to remove the judge and quickly appoint a new judge to ensure a fair trial. The Kentucky Appeals Court has recently made 2 key decisions. Firstly, Brooks will remain in jail with a $10 million bond. Secondly, the court has denied a request to remove the judge presiding over Brooks's trial. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sherry Papini. Keith Papini and Sherry first met in junior high, when he was in 7th grade and she was in 8th grade. Their friendship quickly blossomed and they remained close throughout their teenage years. However, over time, they lost contact with each other and went separate ways. Sherry eventually moved on and married another man in 2006, but their marriage was short-lived, lasting only 2 years. After her divorce, Sherry found herself single once again. Unbeknownst to her, a chance encounter with Keith was on the horizon, and their reunion would rekindle the spark they had long ago. This unexpected reunion revealed the growth and maturity that time apart had brought them. They discovered how much they had missed each other and decided to give their relationship a second chance. As they started dating, their connection grew stronger with each passing day. Within a year of reuniting, Keith and Sherry realized they were meant to be together. In 2009, they got married and had 2 children and lived in Reading, California. To care for her children, Sherry left her job in telecommunications, and Keith continued working at Best Buy as a member of the Geek Squad. Keith and Sherry Papini had what seemed like the perfect life to those around them. However, their seemingly idyllic life took a drastic turn on November 2, 2016, when Keith returned home from work to find his wife, Sherry, missing. Normally, Sherry was at home when Keith arrived, but she was nowhere to be found this time. Keith initially thought Sherry might have gone for a walk, but as the minutes ticked by with no sign of her return, his concern grew. He decided to call their children's daycare center to see if Sherry had picked up the kids. To his surprise and concern, the school secretary told him that Sherry had not been there. Keith then decided to track Sherry's phone using the Find My iPhone app. The app showed that her phone was located at the end of their driveway. Keith immediately ran outside and began searching. To his dismay, he found Sherry's phone lying on the ground, along with her headphones. What's more, he discovered strands of hair tangled in the headphones. Distraught, Keith quickly contacted the Shasta County Sheriff's Office. The sheriff's office acted quickly and treated Sherry's disappearance as a serious matter from the very beginning, they bringing in the FBI to assist with the investigation. Keith is determined to find his wife and bring her home safely. To achieve this, he has asked for the public's assistance. Keith contacted the media to help spread the word about Sherry's disappearance, they sharing her story by covering every detail of her case. As a result, the public became deeply interested in Sherry's disappearance, largely due to her striking appearance and the seemingly ideal life she led. As the story gained media attention, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office started receiving numerous tips from the public. However, these information do not assist in finding Sherry. In their investigation, police examined Sherry's phone for clues. Upon reviewing the phone's contents, investigators found a heated text message exchange between Sherry and Keith from a few months earlier. This discovery raised suspicions about Keith's involvement in Sherry's disappearance. Despite these concerns, Keith cooperated with the police investigation and even volunteered to take a polygraph test to clear his name. The test results showed that Keith was telling the truth. Aside from the text message exchange between Keith and Sherry, investigators found several messages on Sherry's phone from men using fake female names. Further examination suggested that Sherry was preparing to leave Keith. On November 10, 2016, the police located one of these men and questioned him about Sherry's location. He reported meeting Sherry 5 years prior at a restaurant during a work event. Although he claimed to have no knowledge of her whereabouts, he did offer some insight into her marriage to Keith. He shared that she had confided in him about her fear of her husband, Keith, due to his violent behavior. He claimed Keith often confined Sherry to their home. The police opened an investigation into Keith's behavior to verify these allegations. However, after questioning friends and neighbors, they found no concrete evidence supporting Keith's portrayal as a violent person. Friends of the couple shared a different perspective. They described Sherry as attention-seeking and has a tendency to overreact. This new information led the police to consider that Sherry might have exaggerated or fabricated about being abused by her husband. On Thanksgiving morning, just days after Sherry went missing, police received a call for help at 4:32 a.m. The caller reported a woman on the side of I-5 who seemed to need assistance. Officers quickly are present to the scene and found a woman bound by chains and zip ties. Due to her disheveled state, it took a moment for them to identify the woman as Sherry. The officers were relieved to find Sherry alive. They carefully removed her chains and zip ties to ensure her safety. After her release, the officers took Sherry to the hospital for medical attention. It was at the hospital that the full extent of Sherry's ordeal became clear. She had multiple bruises, her hair had been cut short, and she had a burn mark on her arm. Additionally, she had a severe rash and had lost a significant amount of weight, dropping to just 87 pounds. Sherry was interviewed at Woodland Memorial Hospital while recovering, but she was too distraught to share any details without her husband present. Her husband, Keith, was allowed to stay with her during the interview. According to Sherry, she was jogging when a dark-colored SUV approached. The vehicle was driven by two women. The older woman, who had a gun, got out of the car and approached Sherry, while the younger woman stayed in the vehicle. Sherry stated she was forced into the SUV. Before getting in, Sherry left her phone, headphones, and some of her hair behind in the driveway. She intentionally left clues for Keith in case anything went wrong. During the journey in the SUV, Sherry said she drifted in and out of sleep, making it difficult to keep track of time. The women also covered Sherry's face, preventing her from seeing the direction or location she was being taken. Sherry reported that her captors, two women, told her that she was taken because a man wanted to buy her. However, the women did not provide any information about the man's identity or his location. As a result, Sherry felt unease and fear, unsure of where she was being taken or what would happen to her during her captivity. During her testimony, Sherry also claimed to have experienced physical abuse from one of the captors. She alleged that this woman physically hit her many times, causing various injuries. She stated that she was branded on her right shoulder with the word Exodus, which would reportedly make her more appealing to her buyer. Sherry's captors played Mexican mariachi music constantly, of discomfort for Sherry. Throughout her captivity, Sherendra was confined to a small room with boarded-up window. Sherry described the basic but unsanitary and uncomfortable living conditions. In the closet, where she was chained, there was a bucket for her to use for both bowel movements and urination. Approximately 3 weeks after being in captivity, Sherry heard the sound of a gunshot. After that, she never saw the older Hispanic woman again. The other captor, who had been known to remain silent, now communicated more and ordered Sherry into a car, then driven along Interstate I-5. Car suddenly came to a stop, catching Sherry off guard. Startled, she looked around, and was then instructed by kidnapper to exit the vehicle. Sherry carefully got out of the car, feeling both frightened and hopeful. Was this her chance to escape, or was she being led into a more dangerous situation? Without any clear answers, she was left with deep uncertainty. After Sherry's rescue from the side of Interstate 5, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office held a press conference to announce her safe return. During the conference, authorities revealed that Sherry had been abducted by 2 Hispanic women. Unfortunately, this has sparked a wave of racism against Hispanics. In the aftermath of her abduction, Sherry began attending therapy sessions to cope with her ordeal. Fortunately, as a California resident, she became eligible for the Victims' Compensation Fund, which uses state budget to help pay for victims' therapy in the aftermath of the abduction. Sherry has changed her life, giving up her outgoing personality and limiting her social interactions. She now spends most of her time indoors, instead of participating in many of the social activities she once enjoyed. The police released a composite sketch of 2 Hispanic women suspected to be involved in Sherry's abduction about a year into the investigation. However, no new information or leads were received. The police also disclosed that they found male DNA on Sherry's underwear, the same one she was wearing when she was found on the side of the I-5. Authorities confirmed that the DNA did not belong to Sherry's husband, Keith. 2 years after her abduction, the police were still unable to find a match for the male DNA on Sherry's underwear. And the case remained unresolved. In 2020, a significant development took place in the investigation of Sherry's case. The police responsible for her case applied for approval to utilize a new technology called familial DNA analysis, which involves examining DNA profiles to pinpoint possible relatives of the person who contributed the DNA. Familial DNA testing is a crucial tool in solving crimes. It works by comparing DNA evidence to the DNA of known individuals, usually family members of a suspect, to see if there's a match. To aid in the investigation, researchers use genetic markers shared among relatives to narrow down the pool of suspects. In the Sherry Papini case, the police have found new clues when they matched male DNA found on her underwear to family member James Reyes, Sherry's ex-boyfriend. This unexpected result led to numerous questions and changed the direction of the investigation. As a result, the police began to suspect Sherry's ex-boyfriend of being involved in her abduction. To investigate further, the police collected a soda bottle from James's trash and sent it to the forensic lab for DNA analysis in June 2020. The lab then compared the DNA from the soda bottle to the DNA sample found on Sherry's underwear. 1 month later, the lab confirmed that James Reyes was a match to the DNA sample discovered on Sherry's panties the day she was found. The police interviewed James at his home in Costa Mesa, California, about the disappearance of his former girlfriend, Sherry. James stated that he had dated Sherry about 10 years ago and last saw her a year after their breakup. When asked if he was involved in her kidnapping, James initially denied any involvement. However, as the interview progressed, James revealed that he was still close friends with Sherry. He said he was involved in Sherry's disappearance but didn't kidnap her. Instead, he just helped her. According to James, Sherry had contacted him about escaping her abusive husband, Keith. To help her, James arranged for a car, which was rented by one of his friends on November 2, 2016. James used that vehicle to pick up Sherry the next day. Sherry stayed in the back seat of the car during the long drive to James' house in Costa Mesa, lying down the entire time. Once they arrived, Sherry isolated herself in the bedroom for the remainder of her stay. James continued with his daily routine, while Sherry occasionally helped out by cleaning and cooking. During her stay, Sherry started dieting to lose weight. She also asked James to help her harm herself on purpose. Her requests included creating bruises by hitting herself. Sherry asked James to hit her knee with a hockey puck. At first, James was hesitant, but he eventually agreed to her requests. Furthermore, James stated that Sherry asked him to brand the word Exodus onto her right shoulder using a wood-burning tool from Hobby Lobby. James admitted to complying with this request as well. Eventually, Sherry informed James that she had decided to leave his house. Before departing, she requested that James obtain chains and zip ties. Sherry then instructed James drove her back to Redding, California. During the drive, Sherry ordered James to pull over, and he complied. She immediately exited the vehicle, and James drove away. When questioned by the police, James claimed he had no knowledge of the incident Sherry described, involving 2 Hispanic women. However, when the police visited James's house, they were startled by what they found. The layout of several rooms matched the descriptions Sherry had provided, including James' bedroom and closet, which exactly matched a drawing Sherry had created for the police. Several days later, the police met with Sherry and Keith at the police station. During the interview, the police had evidence that suggested Sherry had faked her own kidnapping, and they were prepared to confront her about it. Before revealing the truth, they asked Sherry if she wanted her husband Keith to leave the room. However, Sherry remained silent. The police decided to leave Sherry and Keith alone for a few minutes. During this time, Sherry shared a secret with Keith. Sherry told her husband that she didn't want the police to find the Hispanic woman who kidnapped her because she felt grateful to the woman for letting her go. As a result, she had no intention of pressing charges against the woman. Keith listened to his wife's explanation but became concerned and scared as her words made no sense to him. He pointed out that even if Sherry chose not to press charges, the woman would still face consequences for her actions. The police then re-entered the room and shared a crucial piece of information. They had obtained a DNA match for the male DNA found on Sherry's clothing. That DNA belongs to James Reyes, his wife's ex-boyfriend. Then, the police informed Sherry and Keith that James had passed a polygraph test, suggesting James was telling the truth. The police believed that Sherry might have faked her abduction, and they claimed to have gathered evidence supporting James' version of what happened. According to the police, they also told Sherry that they had discovered information that suggested her weight loss during her disappearance was intentional. Additionally, they believed the rash on her arms could have been caused by the cleaning products she used at James's home. The investigation into Sherry's kidnapping progressed when police discovered that she had staged the incident. The police found evidence that James had indeed inflicted the injuries on Sherry on her own accord, contradicting her claim that she hadn't seen him since their breakup years ago. Specifically, police claimed to have discovered that James had used a wooden object purchased from Hobby Lobby to brand Sherry. They also discovered that Sherry's broken nose was the result of self-inflicted injuries with a hockey stick. Despite this damning evidence, Sherry continued to deny any involvement in her disappearance. However, James provided the police with details about Sherry's disappearance that only someone with insider knowledge would know. Consequently, on March 3, 2022, Sherry was arrested by the FBI for lying to federal agents and faking her own abduction. 6 weeks later, she agreed to plead guilty to these charges as part of a plea deal with federal prosecutors. In the subsequent sentencing, Sherry's defense team requested a lenient sentence of 1 month in prison and 7 months of home detention. However, the prosecution recommended a more severe 18-month sentence. Ultimately, the court sentenced Sherry to 18 months in prison and ordered her to pay a $300,000 fine in September 2022, accepting the prosecution's recommendation. During her sentencing, the judge described she as manipulative and dishonest. At the sentencing hearing, Sherry apologized to those who had been affected by her actions and acknowledged her guilt. She took responsibility for her dishonesty and the harm it had caused to herself and others. Sherry was released from prison in August 2023 and placed in a halfway house. Her relationship with Keith ended on the day of her arrest in March 2022, when Keith learned the truth about her actions. Shortly after Sherry's guilty plea, Keith filed for divorce and sought full custody of their children.